coffee houses, clubs, and neon lights. I rock the people my way, working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. New York, Boston, Philadelphia, LA, I still see your face. Buses roll, distance grows, but I remember you're just a dream away. Working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I'll see you in the morning light. Light on as I drive on, singing our song. Keep the light on as I drive on, singing our Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the pre-election day episode of What Are the Odds? Barnes will join us soon. It is totally my fault. I'm getting like ping-ponged around and sent him the invite late. So he'll be here. All right. Let's wrap through a couple of things though real quick before we do. In case you didn't get the link, to hell with the New York Times and Politico and the rest of them. I just sent out into the chats the link for the live election results for the presidential election. We will get them faster than the AP, folks, which means we will get them faster than the New York Times. Nobody's going to have granular precinct level data the way it has been in the past because we are running a quasi third world election this time around. So best you can hope for is county by county. We will do our best to let you know how much of the absentee ballot vote is left, how much of mail-in votes, in general, how much early votes and what breakdowns what. All right. And of course, we're going to be doing, I got a couple of things I want to announce here. Decision USA 2020, that will be running on a video on one of, if not all of the links that I'm going to send out anyway. We'll have the president, the Senate, the House, all live results, your favorite congressional seats. We're going to talk about which ones to look at. Obviously, one in Iowa is just not looking that good. So let me just put it this way. I think we're headed for either, the general polls are right and Biden goes on to win pretty comfortably in a landslide, I don't know that that's going to happen, and I'll tell you why. The biggest polling misses in history, folks, have come when the class divide is the greatest. And the polling misses miss that. And over the weekend, we all saw the Ann Seltzer, Iowa +7. The reason why I'm smiling about that so much is because it was only 4 years ago. Let's go back in time. You ready? It was only 4 years ago when I remember looking at my Iowa polls. I had Trump by 5, then by 3, actually. And I thought, well, those people in Youngstown are lying. They're not going to vote that heavily for Donald Trump. They were a bigger share of the electorate on election day than we thought they would be in the southeastern part of the state. And anyway, and then everything just started moving. And in Wisconsin, it was like, which way you leaning? 2-1 Trump over Hillary. 2-1. So if we got half of the leaners one night to say, all right, and half of the undecideds to say, all right, we're leaning. They would lean if, 35% Donald Trump, 15% Hillary Clinton. 2-1, 3-1 even sometimes. And over the last couple of days, that started to happen. And I thought to myself, oh boy, here we go again. Now, the difference is, you could argue there are some differences in the electorate. So Trump had some ground he had to make up. There's some key differences. For instance, the independents are not as solidly with Trump as they were in 2016. That may not be true because the Seltzer poll did show independents moving to Donald Trump. We clearly see independents in Pennsylvania and even in Arizona go to Donald Trump, while everybody else is still showing these mind-boggling margins that have never happened before. We saw these 10 to 30 point cinema leads with independents in Arizona. Independents don't move like that. Go look at the exit polls. McSally didn't lose because Nate was right and they went 15, 30 points to Kirsten Sinema. She lost because she lost too much of a Republican base. End of story. She lost independents, are you ready? By a whopping 3 points. Everywhere, nonpartisan affiliations are down. And if I'm wrong anywhere, it's going to be Wisconsin. Because the voter file in Wisconsin, I am going to pull up for you right now while we wait for Robert to hop on, and he will hop on. All right. The voter file in Wisconsin has gotten significantly more Republican since 2016. When I first, way back, started running these machine learning models in the voter files in states where they don't have partisan registration, right? It was routinely D+2, D+3. And then as we got up to 2016, this became more like D+2 and 1. Maybe even. And then if you follow big data, well, we would release some of this, every 3 to 6 months. You could see Wisconsin was like, well, now Wisconsin's R+2. Now Wisconsin's R+3. Now it's R+4. And what happens? Well, people participate in primaries. And then we know where to infer them. That's what happens. They participate in primaries. They give donations. And we know where they're going. There's Robert. And he could probably hear me anyway. I'm doing this. And the bottom line is, where did all these independents go? Let's refresh that. I'll bring in Robert. He can probably hear me anyway. And then also let Laura handle some of this production stuff, right? She's probably listening like, it's about time. Where's my link? I'm telling you. I'm in a good mood, but I'm busted around like crazy. Look at that. Look at that. Wisconsin is over R+8 in the inference now. And in fact, it's coming. And in fact, Robert, welcome to the show. In fact, that moved since Friday.
Yep.
Since Friday when I showed it to you, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, been trending that way for some time. I mean, it's interesting that they're basically assuming the Target Smart data is wrong. I mean, Democrats. Now, the
Yeah,
other
they
thing
are.
that's astounding, because I was doing the early vote breakdown, and I was glad to see people like Patrick Basham and Bill Stepien sort of interestingly put out, I guess, put it this way, the data he put out about where they think the number of ballots they think they're going to get on election day and where they think they are was almost identical to where I was in a lot of those
Yeah.
states. So I was
Yeah.
like, I'm glad to see a little surprised to see it. I guess they figure everybody's got their own thing anyway. But to put that out there was a little interesting. But no question. It's like everybody looked at the poll, ignored what polling was saying about what was going to happen with early voting.
I was just going to say the polling, actually, with the exception of Pennsylvania, the polling we conducted for the Public Polling Project pretty much nailed this, right?
Yeah, well,
and actually, in fact, I'm wrong in Wisconsin, Robert. I think I'll be the first one to admit this is going to be a polling mess.
That it's more Republican. Yeah, Wisconsin's. All I cared about in Wisconsin was tell me what Kenosha is doing and tell me what Norwegians are doing.
And in fact, let's tell people what they're doing. I got a couple of things. Go ahead. You talk. I'm going to pull it up.
Okay, yeah. So the reason why I focus on that is Wisconsin's notoriously hard to poll. This goes way, way back. Yeah. Go back and look at 2004, and you had two different groups of pollsters polling in Wisconsin. One group was saying easy for Kerry in 2004, like 5, 6, 7 points. The other group, including Gallup, was saying 7 to 8 points for Bush.
Yeah.
I mean, and they kept polling that way. In other words, whatever they were just missing. And what it was is if you polled heavy the eastern half of the state, the Fox River Valley, you got big W numbers. If you polled the western part of the state, heavily Norwegian, you got big Kerry numbers.
That's so true.
And whatever was happening, that's what they were tracking internally. And I was telling Richard last week when I looked into the internals of the Marquette poll, however they came up with their averages. Their averages ended up being more pro-Trump than they were in 2016 by about a point or two. But if you look at their internals, working class voters trended Trump by their average, their median poll in the Marquette poll had Trump doing 10 points better in 2020 than in 2016 amongst working class Wisconsinites and amongst the Waukesha County Republicans who left Trump in 2016.
Can I give them that number in Waukesha now?
Yeah,
you want to hear it? 66-28 for Trump. 66-28 we polled Waukesha.
And that's slightly better than Romney got. So
it is.
What we talked also, I noticed, I think it's The Real American or one of them is confused about Michigan. The people don't understand that part of Western Michigan. This is where the media narrative of suburb, as if they all look like where they live, is very misleading.
So true.
As we talked about 2 weeks ago, I think it was, look for Amish country and the Pennsylvania Dutch to trend back towards Trump based on a variety of factors. The Ben Shapiro voter. And you find the Ben Shapiro voter disproportionately in religiously conservative, respectful constituencies in the Midwest. The Pennsylvania Dutch, the Dutch Reformed of Western Michigan, Ottawa County being a big one. And then the respectable Lutherans of places like Waukesha County, Wisconsin. These are voter groups that Trump did lose, but they weren't part of a broader suburban trend. They trended back Republican in Wisconsin for the governor's race. They trended back Wisconsin in Michigan for the Senate race. They were coming back to Trump, and Trump showed no weakness in that voter group in the presidential primaries. There wasn't like what Obama got, a majority protest vote out of West Virginia.
Do you know what his share of the vote was in the Wisconsin primary? Think about this. A primary he lost to Ted Cruz 4 years ago. This is why, I really think some people like Nate's always losing 20% of the Republican Party. We do, in our own polling, find him losing some of the Republican Party. We do. All right. But nothing like that. And in truth, that happened in 2016. And in reality, it didn't really happen. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Remember?
For what, Richard, for those folks out there, you're seeing people like Henry Olsen, who ever since he's joined the Washington Post has become more of a hack. Just quit writing books about calling yourself a working class Republican when all you do now is read polls. That's embarrassing, Henry. But on those components, throughout 2016, they said that the Democrats were more united for Hillary than the Republicans were for Trump. Every poll
Newsweek plus 14.
Exactly. Double-digit advantage. They said the crossover vote was overwhelmingly going to favor Hillary.
Yes.
It ended up, of course, being the opposite. This is because of who
YouGov.
they're polling. They were polling
YouGov, Robert.
Oh yeah, the same dynamic there.
23% of Republicans early voted in Florida voted for Hillary Clinton. Do you remember that?
Yes, it was obvious. I mean, that their numbers were just embarrassingly bad. So they repeated the same thing all over again in 2020. Not a big surprise, but that's where those of us who were tracking how these voters think, tracking what they were doing in voter registration, presidential primary participation, enthusiasm metrics, other things, and people I know on the ground. I almost went to school in all these places when I was a high school kid. I took a tour of the religious conservative schools in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, et cetera. So I have a sense of them. And then I've had family that I've lived there or family has lived in all these places. Just, I have my father was originally from Pennsylvania or born in Pennsylvania. My parents lived for 10 years in Wisconsin, in Michigan and Wisconsin. And then in Wisconsin, of course, I went to law school there. What Richard and I talked about 2 weeks ago is Richard was going to oversample and look at particular Ottawa County, Michigan, Waukesha County, Wisconsin, and the reason for that was they're overpopulated by religious conservatives who abandoned Trump as Trump ran about 10 points behind in the margin in that voter group in 2016 compared to Romney. And the president,
Ottawa 64-36.
Exactly. And what's happening is both of those counties, both of those areas, both of those constituencies coming home to Trump. In fact, Trump is doing slightly better than Romney did in 2012 in those places. So this is why, and then you add into that the vote out west that matches this is the Mormon vote, which, nobody's worried about Utah, but where it matters is Arizona and Nevada, because both of them, Nevada, 5% of the vote here is Mormon. And in both Arizona and Nevada, he bled out to third-party candidates from a Ben Shapiro voter. That voter appears to be coming home. And to give you an example in Nevada, what a difference that makes, if that 20% of the Mormon vote that left in 2016 comes back, that 2.4 edge that Hillary had shrinks to 1.4 for Biden.
Yeah, the Norwegian is, just to answer somebody's chat, the Norwegian's a 20-point margin.
Exactly. And for folks out there, I've got some people are like, oh, maybe Norwegians are Republican. No, they're not.
No, they're not.
2018, the most Norwegian county in Minnesota, Norman County, voted for the Democrat for the Senate in a relative. It was a plus 10, plus 11, but it was about a normal Democratic gap in a Democratic year in Minnesota. It voted for the Democrat, and I think it voted for Trump by like 20 points or something.
Same thing. This is what we're seeing here, Robert, is a bit of a return. That's the point. And look, evangelicals in 2016, we talk about Iowa all the time because in Iowa, they were 34% of the electorate and the president carried them 70-25. In Wisconsin, white born-again evangelicals were 28% of the electorate and he carried them 73-28. Right now, that margin is about 4 points wider, 74-24, which 1%. One went to Joe Jorgensen. One. So, exactly. I mean,
you're going to see, and again,
there could be small little swings, but
and even
it doesn't show erosion.
Well, particularly it's where it's from. It's those middle-class suburbs that are respectable voters who really felt uncomfortable with Trump's demeanor and disposition, who voted Ted Cruz in the primaries in 2016. Right. And a fair portion of them listened to the Romney speech of 2016 and didn't vote for Trump. And remember, Ben Shapiro, leading young Christian conservative in social media, podcasting, talk radio space, publicly refused to vote for Trump in 2016. I mean, he was representing that constituency. I'm not exactly a Benji fan, but that's another story. He has come out heavily endorsed Trump. And then your libertarian types, your middle-class libertarian types, of which there's more in Arizona and Nevada, but still some in Wisconsin and Michigan.
Yes.
Amash, of course, flipped over to their Libertarian Party cause, the congressman in Michigan. That voter is also, Clay Travis did not vote Trump in 2016, of Outkick, the coverage, big, huge sports broadcaster. Dave Rubin did not vote for Trump in 2016. Both of them were very public about that fact. Both of them have now not only are voting Trump, but publicly endorsing Trump in a dramatic way. That's a sign. It's not that they are going to cause a whole bunch of people to vote with them. It's that they're representative of a particular constituency in the country. They're what you could call a representative poll of a particular type of voter. That was the voter that Trump lost. And this goes back to a fact I've been talking about, but I probably haven't mentioned it enough, because in seeing how badly people are interpreting third-party vote patterns in the history of the country, when an incumbent is running and the third-party vote share goes down, the incumbent has won every single time. Even though in most of those elections, the third party was thought of to have helped that incumbent get elected in the first place.
That's right. Yeah.
You'll remember this, Richard, 1996.
Absolutely.
How many Republicans thought because Ross Perot's vote was way down that meant Bill Clinton was a dead duck, because they'd convinced themselves that 2/3 of Perot's vote would have gone for Bush. Now, that was a Republican-oriented vote, but it was never going to be a Bush vote. And by 1996, it was going to be a Clinton vote or a non-vote. In 1912, an ex-president divides the Republican Party, helps Woodrow Wilson get elected. There was no third-party Republican challenge in 1916. There were a bunch of establishment Republicans that thought that meant they would take out Wilson. They were wrong. Wilson won. The same thing in 1968. Even though Wallace was a Democrat, it was known that his voter group was likely to go to Nixon at 72, given that they nominated McGovern. So that was less of a surprise. But 1984 was still a surprise. Going into it a year out, when people thought Reagan was going to be beat, polls in the summer showing Mondale up.
We were just looking at them.
Exactly. Remember, Reagan barely got 50%. And the logic was, he barely got 50%. John Anderson stole a bunch of votes that would have gone to the Democrat. That's why with John Anderson off the ballot, Democrats can surge. Well, that didn't happen, needless to say, in 1984. And then, again, in 1996. And then 2004. Everybody on the left.
Don't forget 04. Do not forget 04.
I remember, because I was representing Ralph Nader in 04, and all of my Democratic friends were hating on me and putting little not death wishes, but little curses wherever they could on me. Because I was helping them try to get on the ballot. And what's interesting was W's people actually were trying to keep Nader off the ballot too. But either way, that was a classic example where they said, hey, Nader's going to get far fewer votes, not even on the ballot in a bunch of states. Surely Kerry will win now. And it went just the opposite. W did better than he did. So the history is, when third-party voter interest is high, it means the country is unhappy with the state of affairs. When third-party interest goes down, it means they're satisfied with the incumbent. Even if they're not saying it, even if they're not verbalizing it, that's what it has always meant in political history. And in particular, when you look at the subgroups that voted for Johnson, especially in swing states, they're disproportionately voters that are coming home to Trump. They're religious Ben Shapiro voters, Dave Rubin voters, and Clay Travis voters. And those voters are going to go 2-1, 3-1 for Trump. It's being missed in the polls. It's going to be one of the big errors of Nate Cohn's polling. He predicted they were going to go massively for Joe Biden. It's going to turn out he was dead wrong. And what you've been picking up that nobody else has been picking up is that the libertarian third-party vote this time around is mostly a young millennial left protest vote.
It's hurting Biden in Arizona. We didn't drop Minnesota yet. I just got backed up, but Minnesota's going to show a little. It's going to show, by the way, I'll just say it's going to show a lead for Biden. Sometimes you're just uncomfortable with something you've done, Robert. I don't know. I just feel like, particularly in the southwestern part of the state, I feel like. Well, I don't feel like, I know it's not represented enough. It's just not. And I could show you some of the weights. They're outrageous, man. It's not, you know what? It wasn't even the Twin Cities. It was the Twin City burbs. And for the people who don't know what I'm talking about, there are 8 counties that make up the Twin City suburbs. Really, 2 are peeled off when you really wait for region, because you're trying to be exit poll friendly, because they are the Twin Cities, Hennepin and Rams, right? And you take them right out, and then that leaves 6 other Twin City burbs. Robert, they were 38% of the raw. I'm like, that's just so ugly, right? How could you do anything better? But Trump had a huge lead in the Northeast. So it made me think, if it's just it may, even if it is just a little out of reach for Trump, I don't think it's impossible. I really don't. If he has a good night, I really don't. There are just 4 groups that are voting for him that made it close last time. And there's more of them. Okay, that's
Right.
number one.
Well-
Number two, I was told by both sides that their internal polling did not show Trump doing that badly in the suburbs in Wisconsin. All right. And at first I'm like, I don't know. This looks a little bit too, I told you, this looks a little bit too rosy to me to Donald Trump, like Kenosha, Racine, where I thought he would slip, right? You know, because Republicans have been slipping in Racine. He's not doing badly at all in our polling in Racine. And get this, with a college degree, which is something Marquette said a while ago. When it comes to Wisconsin, if you have an undergrad, you are not repulsed by Donald Trump like you are in other states. If you are a graduate, you're getting, Biden's clobbering him by 30 points among those who have a graduate degree. I mean, it's bad, you know, but
that's a very liberal
I thought
group in Wisconsin.
very liberal in Wisconsin, but they're about splitting some college associates. Trump is romping with high school or less. And undergrad, Trump actually has about a 3-point lead on, which we don't wait for area because people don't know how to describe where they live. We wait by county, right? And region, right? But not area. They're two different things. People mix them up all the time. Because if you ask somebody if whether they're not, they live in a burb or they don't know. You'd be shocked how many of them, like, this is a suburb. You do not live in urban America, man. You're like a wannabe gangster or something. I don't know. You don't live. So we don't do that. But in the burbs, he actually had a lead. 46.6. I mean, tied, but 46.6 to 46.3 in the burbs. And that is because when you polled Kenosha and Racine, their two top issues were the economy and police and crime and safety. When you polled all the other burbs, especially in the western part of the state, it was the economy, followed closely behind by coronavirus, right? So there's a great divide in Wisconsin right now, is what I'm saying. There really is. And if I'm wrong, it's going to be in Wisconsin, because if I shifted even marginally to what L2, Target Smart, and Aristotle are all pretty much in the same ballpark on what the electorate who has voted so far in Wisconsin looks like. If you look at our polling, it doesn't look like it's going to be that much different. Like it means that if I was wrong about this first set of assumptions, then I'm probably wrong about election day. It's probably more favorable to Republicans on election. I mean, can we all agree that Wisconsin's going to be more favorable?
Yeah, it's going to be a low turnout. Two groups that are not turning out anywhere, really. Texas is probably the place that they got the best results in, Democrats. It's extraordinary misleading data. Because if you had been paying it, I've been getting lots of questions about the early vote and then watching Democratic analysis on the early vote. The people explained in polls throughout the fall that a whole bunch of Republicans that normally vote early were not going to, and a whole bunch of Democrats who usually wait till election day were going to vote early. So in fact, and even the turnout has been mostly consistent with that data. What's not been consistent with the data is the Democratic lead that was supposed to exist.
Yep.
So it was supposed to happen, and the reason for it, and so I get people arguing about voter files, and then Nate Cohn ended up arguing that there's all these crossover voters, and Nate Silver ended up arguing that independents were going by independents. I was like, okay, let's postulate all that. Here's the bigger problem. The early voting data forecast let's look at demographics. The young vote is not there. The African-American vote is not there. The Mexican-American vote is not there. So the reason why the Democrats had a huge lead amongst early voters in the polls in every key swing state was they were expecting the youth vote to be a greater share of the early vote than it was of Election Day 2016. And the same with the African-American vote, and the same with the Latino vote. So much so that it would end up being higher by the end of the election process. Instead, it's down. It's down by anywhere from 20 to 30%. It is fallen off. In New Hampshire, 4% of the entire early vote so far are people under 30. 4%. That's supposed to be 10% of the vote in New Hampshire, even in a bad year. In Wisconsin, it's at 4%. The African-American vote is extremely low. So if you take your numbers, Richard, and assume that these analytics are right about just the demographics, not looking at the partisan gap, but just looking at the demographics. As you point out, you don't weigh by party, you weigh by demographics. That can, in turn, create an accurate partisan gap. Well,
That's
I'm
right.
sure if you took the youth vote from 13%, 14% in Wisconsin to say 7%, which is that may be high at this point. I mean, that's how bad the turnout is in Wisconsin.
And it's usually slanted from 18 to 24, and it's
it-
not this time.
No, it's tiny. So just that adjustment by itself, I was actually doing this in live time when I was watching the show. So I was just doing the math of, okay, if I adjust that group to here and this group to here, what does the final number look like? It's Trump up in Wisconsin in your own poll. Just if
I know it.
Just that the age demographics are different. And so that's why the early vote, when I looked at it, is fantastic from a Republican perspective, because again, I didn't focus on the partisan gap. I know a lot of people do. In Florida, in Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, it's actually been okay. Less so Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, and Nevada, because they have now an established history. Looking at partisan gap matters, but I still don't care for it. What it has been predictive is demographics. If young people were supposed to turn out compared to the polls, they turned out even less than they did in 2016. So I mean, you're at a point where unless 25 to 30% of the election day vote in Florida is under 30, they're going to be less than 2016's vote share. And they need in Nevada, it needs to be like 40% of the vote. And those all in order for John Ralston to be right in Nevada, he needs a bunch of well, here's what happened in Nevada. Almost all the vote is overwhelmed. Democratic vote lead in the registration rolls is all under 45. And it's all overwhelmingly Mexican-American and African-American, particularly Mexican-American. They just didn't vote. Like, this is where John Ralston hasn't figured a huge problem in his analysis yet. So Democrats are supposed to have, according to New York Times poll last week, Democrats were going to have an 8-point lead at the end of early vote.
That's right.
It's 3 points.
Yep.
So we don't have to guess whether the polls have been wrong. They've all been wrong about the people who've already voted. They predicted what would happen live. Then they said what happened at the end.
It's not a matter. It's not a matter, folks, of whether they're wrong. It's a matter of how much they're wrong by. That's really, it's just, I mean, could it be that all of a sudden these voters are going to come tomorrow and just like show up after they had 2 weeks of a quasi third world election system to show up? They still didn't show up. I've never seen anything like this in my time, all my time. I have never seen, and they're just going to show up tomorrow. This is the problem they have in Florida, Robert. Yeah. Listen, I want to just bring up what Nate says in Florida. First of all, Nate had Gillum winning MPAs by 20 points in 18. He won them by a little less than 10, supposedly, according to the exit polls. I'm still not sure. It was probably, yes. And then he had them his last poll, which was Biden +3 only, had him leading with independents by 14 points or 15 points. Now he's got him leading only by 10 points. That's called a shift away from a candidate, not to a candidate. That is a movement away from a candidate, in case he doesn't understand that. And secondly, according to his own bias in his own poll, independents are even, because he tends to overestimate the Democratic support among that group by 10 points. Now, of course, it could be that he turns out right. My point is, it's not going to be enough, even if it is, because NPAs are a lower share of the electorate again. And this is something JP Morgan tried to warn us all about, right? They were doing their analysis and they said, this is the problem with the polls. And they, by the way, guys, you talk about pollster scorecards. These guys are smart. They go through everybody's methodology with a fine-tooth comb and they pick you apart like you're a toddler. All right. And these guys said, I think he said like two polling firms corrected for their Democratic bias. 2. That's it. And none of them are the ones you're seeing being touted. None. So I'm just saying, I really don't, at this point, I don't think it's a matter of how wrong. I don't think it's a matter of if they're wrong. It's how wrong. And lastly, I'll just say about this moment that came out today. All right. That looks just like the poll they did for Hillary. And I'm laughing because I'm crunching Minnesota and I hear him because I guess Laura's got him in the radio or some Fox radio or something. And I hear Murray, right? And he's like, you know, I got to say, though, there is some good news for Trump in this poll. Seniors are moving back to him in Pennsylvania. Robert, that was 2 weeks ago. Didn't we say that 2 weeks ago? We had seniors, being a little sketchy with Trump in Pennsylvania for a while. And they came back to him about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. So where the hell has he been? That's my point, man. Really, that is my point. And if you take 2 weeks to catch that, then you are not going to catch the movement with the 30 to 44-year-olds. You're just not. You're just not.
The Norwegian number you gave me, was that Minnesota or Wisconsin?
That was Wisconsin. In Minnesota, give me a second. Minnesota. Let me see if I can drag up Minnesota.
My 3 areas of curiosity for Minnesota. And again, what I've been talking about with folks for...
Yeah, and I'll put it up. It's probably going to be like Biden +4. And again, I'm like uncomfortable with it. And you'll see why. Because the Southwest is grossly underrepresented.
And and what I've been trying to teach people to do is I don't pay attention to the top line. Pay attention to certain groups that there's representative samples of that are predictive of the election. And because I think it's very tough in the modern era to get accurate polling, so you can get close.
Robert, I tried. I put the poll off for 2 days. We stayed in the field. We stayed in the field. We stayed in the field. What we kept getting were what we call duplicates. And I always throw people off when I say that, but it means, listen, if you already know what a demographic, you already got enough of one demographic. So you reach the Democratic woman in rural America. That's not who you're trying to speak to anymore. You're trying to reach the one who's 45 to 64, who makes a certain amount of money, who has a certain degree. And you just keep getting duplicates over and over. And all that does is inflate Biden's margin in rural areas when that's not going to happen, because when you reach the Northeast like we did, Trump is clobbering him. So Survey USA was right about that. The only thing that we're wrong with is we have Jason Lewis several points behind Donald Trump. Several points. Yes. It's not, I was like stunned. That's not going to,
well, at least,
unless Trump wins that state, it doesn't look like it's going to happen for him.
Interesting. I would say that, the three groups I'm curious about are Iron Range, Scott and Dakota County, and Norwegians.
All right, let's go by nationality. Didn't get there, but I can do it right now. Basically, let's see. I can still give people the totals though. Let me just rows, columns. Let me move over. Where's nationality? I want nationality. All right, we'll update that, and then I'll be able to give people at least how many points it looks like the president and Lewis are different from.
Yeah. But also being curious, is there a drop off, particularly in those three groups? But I would expect Lewis to be running even or better in Scott and Dakota. The question is he running behind in both in the Iron Range and with Norwegians? Actually,
I don't know. They're actually now that it's, because the weights are being applied. See, that's why Raw can really throw you off. Nah, they're really not. They're both, he's maybe a half a point behind the president. Maybe a half.
Oh, okay. Because my view is, as long as I think he will run better in the Minneapolis area, in part because he's
me too.
There. So my view was he just needed to be close to Trump amongst Norwegians in the Iron Range. And the risk is that both of those areas are very ancestrally Democratic and deeply distrustful of Republicans at the congressional level.
50. Oh, wow. That's crazy, actually. Yeah, you were on to that. See, that's where his weakness is coming from. Norwegians, totally reversed. Totally reversed. That's a ticket split. 55-35, flipped. Crazy, right? So, wow, that's going to make for a weird map on election night if that's right. A weird map, That's weird.
I wish I would have known that before I put him in my Minnesota Senate bed.
Yeah, but you know what? He is doing even better with Germans than Trump.
And he can still do it. His odds are good. He's at 4-1 or 5-1. So he probably has a 1 in 3 shot. Just by my estimate, if he's behind with the Norwegians, he won't carry the state. But that's the reason. But for Trump, so Trump's winning Norwegians in Minnesota.
He is, but he's getting again English.
Oh, I'm not worried about those groups.
Yeah, he'll be overrepresented again. By the way,
certain groups the same groups that are overrep. What you're seeing is why Nate Cohn gets his poll results in the Midwest. he's getting a very particular group. He's getting, Swedes in Wisconsin.
That's right.
He's getting the English, Swedish, post-college, upper middle class, disproportionate voter, or their mother that maybe lives in a small town, who's not, that's not your Trump. The key groups there that have always been tough. Like, that's why Survey USA, I went back and looked, has like an average 7-point Democratic error in Minnesota dating back to 2010, for 10 years now.
But I can understand though how you can get it. You can get it easy, Robert. You can get it real easy. It's not, it's not it's not an easy. And by the way, with phone polling, it sucks. Sucks.
Yeah, but if Trump's doing well amongst Norwegians, and to be honest with you, it's more affirmation that you got a good sample of Norwegians that they're splitting, because at least historically they just don't vote Republican down ballot. Very tough to get down ballot. These are the people, by the way, these in the Iron Range is why Jesse Ventura was governor of Minnesota. People forget because Minneapolis Swedish so dominates the mindset, mentality, and perception of Minnesota. People forget how much it's Fargo country, like that's show in the movie. The Iron Range is very distinctive, and I mean that it has a deep populist streak. It just doesn't. It's not a place. It's not a pro-business kind of conservatism there.
It's just so too. Lewis is doing worse with whites, right? So whites, they'll split their vote in Minnesota. Technically, maybe Republicans will win them by a few points, and that's it. That's all. It's not like the rest of the country. And Lewis is he's running about 3 points behind Donald Trump on whites, but he does better with other groups, Asians and even Hispanics. That's what we saw. So I mean, there's just not that many of them there. But Trump he's pulling in a respectable share of black voters at 13%.
He'll do better. Lewis will do better in the Twin Cities.
That's what that is. That's an Asian educated.
I think Trump can, if he's doing that well amongst Norwegians, and most importantly, that means he's going to hold the Norwegian vote. I think the Twin Cities will be a net wash compared to, I think he'll do a little better in certain places, a little worse in others. But it'll be a net wash, I think, at the end of the day, which means to me, as long as he flips the Iron Range, and he gets a little bit better turnout out of rural Minnesota where he's strong, then he's going to flip the state, because he doesn't have to make a lot of room. It's what, 40,000 votes he needs to make up, 50,000.
If he doesn't fall that high, right? But if you look at the projections on Target Smart, again, they could be wrong. I'm looking at demographics. I don't care about party. I'm looking at demographics. That's Trump rich demographics. Really, in Minnesota, the only one he's carrying is high school and less. So no college. That's all he's carrying. The rest of them Biden takes by a little bit. So that's his weakness.
Both college and post-college vote is a Democratic trending group because of the Twin Cities and Swedish influence. But was he? So it sounds like what you're saying is what you picked up a couple of months ago. He's even doing better in the Iron Range than then.
Yeah, it's weird because it's like, the population wise, it doesn't look like it's enough to offset it. At least
it makes up about
theoretically.
Half, but all he needs is slight turnout changes.
That's right.
If he runs 5-6 points better amongst African American voters, I think it's 4 or 5% in Minnesota, something like that.
Yeah, it's actually looking like it's going to be really low this time. Yeah, really low. No, but see, 4, 3.
That too is okay.
I'm serious.
If they drop, for people to know, I'll give an example with Texas in a second. If the African American vote goes from, say, 4.5% to 3.5% of the statewide vote, and that vote is replaced by rural.
Guys, hold on, let me stop, because they're dragging. He's saying Norwegian. That is what is on the census, guys. Norwegian, not Nordic. Okay, it is Norwegian on the census. Okay,
somebody think it's Nordic is all of the countries. So that's Sweden,
together,
Finnish, Finland, and Norwegian. It's just you have to go back and research their history. There's more Norwegians that live in America than live in Norway, and it was who left Norway. So it wasn't quite the same with the Swedes and the Danes. The Norwegians that left, they left for religious protest reasons and other reasons. So this is where Kevin Phillips' Emerging Republican Majority is a great book. Why people came here from certain regions often shaped their future politics. So that's why German Catholics were different than German Protestants in their voting
Yeah.
behavior, even though both are Germans. They often came here for different reasons. A lot of German Protestants came here because of religious oppression. Also, if you knew which German Protestants settled which regions, you know which ones came here for religious protest reasons and which ones came here for economic reasons. And that tended to shape their future voting behaviors differently because they created different cultures that transmitted those values through their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. It's why ancestry is such a powerful tool. That's what Phillips explained. He explained that you could predict American elections from 1776 to 1966 by simply knowing the ancestral habits of somebody's grandfather. And people are like, no, that can't be true. Yeah, it is true because otherwise you shouldn't be able to predict it. I should not have been able to predict that Norwegians were trending Trump when they're a historically Democratic group. That just that fact about them let me know where I thought they were going to be going and how decisive they were. And so that's
this. Go ahead. Finish your thought. And then
I was going to say,
go ahead.
But here's the thing: if he flips the iron range plus gets just a 1 point, like a half a point down in the African American vote, and it's replaced by a half a point more rural working class Trump voters, that combination flips Minnesota as long as everything else holds steady.
I just identified where that issue is. Okay. And this is why I always tell people, sometimes you just don't have enough to make sense of it until, you have time to dig through it, and just to go through it. So here is the regional numbers. Okay. So in the Northeast, it's 2 female. That's why the margin would be bigger. It's just 2 female. All right. So the rest of the counties mirror almost exactly what he did in 2016. In the Twin Cities, he's getting clobbered 63.3, 28.4. Again, that's a clobbering, but it's basically what happened in 2016.
Exactly.
All right.
It might even be a little bit better.
He did win the Eastern Twin City suburbs, but we have him down here 48-42. And that would be what makes that difference if that happens. However, again, like we saw in Wisconsin, Michigan, and just about everywhere else, the person who is less likely, I suspect there are some out there, and maybe they'll admit it, maybe they're doing it, but I'm not. If I think you're full of crap, I'm still taking your response at face value. All right. And I'm just trying to reach more people. Right. That's what I do. I'm not going to say, you know what? I think this guy and this girl is full of it. So, I'm not doing that because then when does it end? Right. When does it end? A pollster can't do that. You can't do it.
What you're referencing is the shy Trump vote and whether or not the gap between some of the pollsters on the right is whether or not do you see polling as forecasting or do you see polling as measuring opinion? And if you see polling as forecasting, that group, Patrick Basham for the Democracy Institute, Trafalgar, both of them see polling as forecasting. And it's understandable because both of them know they're going to be assessed by their forecast.
Words,
so for them, their measurement is different than what Richard's doing. Richard's trying to measure opinion as it exists. And you can look at it and decide whether you think that opinion might not forecast things. So you might say, well, that's what Richard's talking about, that there's some of these suburban voters showing unusual undecided rates in places that otherwise in other like communities across the country are trending Trump that are not. And I mean, Minneapolis suburbs would be a high likely place where you're going to have a shy Trump vote. I mean, they just dealt with riots for the last 4 months. So would you want to tell random pollsters that you're voting Trump if you live in that area?
And this is where I'm going with this. So everywhere we polled on the question, we're trying to identify who would be shy and who wouldn't, right? So we asked these questions that we've been asking. 1, do you believe in a shy Trump vote? For some reason, the suburban female believes in it more than anybody else. Okay. Why do you think that is, folks? All right. And then the second thing is, are you comfortable being truthful about your political beliefs, such as how you intend to vote with each group of people? And I've been doing family, friends, neighbors, coworkers, strangers, and pollsters. I've only been putting up the results for pollsters in the last couple of days because I'm just too damn busy to do it all. So I've been doing what I think is most important, right? So in the rest of the areas, right, maybe 20, maybe like 14 or 15% will say they're very uncomfortable in rural America. But in suburban America, it's 20 or sometimes more. Like Michigan was the highest again, in 20% in Michigan that are suburban, and they're overwhelmingly female. As a matter of fact, they are or black men. All right, that's either female or you're a black man.
And by the way, that's exactly what Basham found. So he went into it with I'm blanking, Joseph Cotto. He said the two groups he was talking about, there are two kinds of, quote, shy Trump voter. He says that there's the shy Trump voter that's shy because he won't answer your poll. You could call them a shy voter. He said that's your rural working class guy. It's not because they're
a pain in the ass.
Yeah, exactly. It's not because they're shy. It's screw you. You're wasting my time.
He doesn't care. He don't want to talk to you.
Exactly. He said, but with the poll voter they were getting, and they, like for folks out there, Patrick Basham forecasted Brexit. He's a British guy. He's though he lives in DC, I believe. Democracy Institute forecast Trump winning. He got a lot of unfair criticism because his popular vote margin was off, but he wasn't focused on that. He was focused on whether the Electoral College would go to Trump, because that's who actually elects presidents here in America. He accurately forecast Brexit. He accurately forecast the 2016 election in terms of Electoral College outcome. And by the way, the reason the popular vote number was off, this is why when they tell you the national popular vote was correct, they're lying. Because I followed the internals of all of those polls. I was deep into it.
We just blew California and New York.
Well, really,
I don't know why I didn't think she was a senator from New York. I should have thought that she was going to get a higher share. But
it was everywhere. In other words, what happened, folks, was that in states that were uncompetitive, Republicans had below average turnout.
That's exactly right.
It combined, and Democrats had way above average turnout. And so it took, and by the way, none of those media polls were predicting that, because there's a reason why they were saying Hillary +4, but it was a 90% chance Hillary would win. It's because their internals were not showing a competitive race in the Midwest. And the only reason they got to +4 is they thought it was Obama 2012. They thought it was +7 Wisconsin, +7 Pennsylvania, +7 Michigan, +8 Minnesota, +5 Iowa, +4 Ohio, all of that. So what everybody missed, he gets unfair criticism. They really dislike him just because he called it right, and they don't like that. But everybody missed. His model was much more accurate to what the popular vote would have been if turnout would have been the same across the country as it was in the swing states. It just wasn't. Also, what people still don't realize is Trump left a lot of votes on the table in the Midwest. While Trump got back some voters who didn't vote in 2012, nowhere near the numbers he could have. There's a lot of rural working class voters that just said, I don't really care too much.
In fact, we have identified, Robert, we have indeed identified somebody who did not, I don't know if I should get totally into it, but I don't want to get sidetracked, but it's pertinent to Minnesota. So that's why we did, in fact, identify people who had voted in 2008, but did not vote in the subsequent elections. And they're not that much, but 4% is a chunk. And, if they're going overwhelmingly for one candidate, it could blunt. By the way, the new voter thing is not showing up, man. 8% in Minnesota. That's it. So
right.
That's a normal increase in election.
And that's where that younger student vote is going to be down. By the way, if Democrats lose this, they're going to be really bitter about the idiocy.
That's what Laura's saying. They did this to themselves if they lose this.
All in on the pandemic by having everybody do vote by mail, not doing voter organization, not having people on college campuses rolled out to vote. Yep. A smart Democratic governor would have said everybody has to come back to college, but only for the purposes of voting. At least be truly honest. I got my first door knock yesterday from the Democrats, and I live in a Mexican American community here, predominantly in Las Vegas. And so normally
it's a little late.
Normally I get tons of it. Came very late. I'll get into why Nevada is very close a little bit later in the show. But the key when I look at Minnesota, what I wanted to know was, is Trump flipping the iron range? Is there no uneven?
He is indeed. He is indeed. The Northeast is 48, 42 in totality. in the Northeast, the 4 counties in the
So
Northeast.
that's 10 plus. That's going to be about 25, 30,000 votes, especially if turnout is up there. So
And
that's
listen to this.
more
So
than half the deficit.
he's down a little bit in the Twin Cities. Ironically, are you ready? Ironically, guess where Joe Jorgensen has? All right, so Joe Jorgensen statewide is at 2.6. In every region, she's in the ones except for the Twin City suburbs where she is over 5%. It's possible or it's a park. All right.
Two things are happening with Georgia. The actual people who are going to disproportionately vote, you have your regular libertarians, about 1% of the election.
That's it. 1, 2, yeah.
The number that's going to be above that is going, some states it gets up to 2, even 3 in some places. But the states where it gets above that, or in the constituencies where it gets above that, I believe this time in the polls, it's going to be Trump people who are parking their vote, and then it won't show up in the actual vote for Jorgensen. Where Jorgensen, I think, vote will show up unusually if it gets above 1%. It's going to be minority millennials. It's going to be left who just are like, like my little sister. They're like, no way I'm voting.
Yeah. Oh, I see it. I absolutely see it. Because I go through them. I'll look at them. I'll look through the raw one by one, line by line, especially when we get to the point where we're at now, where we allocate for leaners. And I should have uploaded that screenshot. Maybe some of you guys did see it on Twitter. I'm not sure if you did. But in Minnesota, just like basically everywhere else, Donald Trump was taking leaners just slightly more than 2-1. All right. In Minnesota. And then
a long history of that. When Republicans do well in Minnesota, they've almost always overperformed the polls.
Check out this by region. Check out this by region. The remaining of the regions. East Central is 62-34. So Biden is doing like 1 point better maybe than Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump's doing about 2% better than he did in East Central in 2016. And in where is it? Where's the rest of it? I did give you the Twin City burbs, right? I did indeed, right? Okay.
Now, do you have any breakdown for Scott and Dakota in particular? I was curious about.
Yeah, I mean, I could look.
It might be real small.
And the South is like 53-39. Okay, the rest of the South. And by the way, in the North, I just want to say, in the North, the Northeast, I just reached more people there. The Northwest, I did not reach that many people, like I said before.
So all you got to know about up there is Norwegian, though.
But that's what I mean. It's skewing. That's going to skew the margin overall, because who are you calling? Duluth. Yeah. You're calling Duluth, and you're getting a ton of Duluth. All right. So what were the where'd you want again? What was it again?
About Scott, Dakota, and Olmsted.
Okay, let's see what we got. Olmsted, I think I remember being a little bit looking at it was a little bit bad for Trump. Let me see though. I could be wrong. Don't take my word for it. All right, so Scott, Dakota, and Olmsted. Come on, guys. Spin around, guys. Spin around. The database is getting huge because this polling project was a success. But again, I can see how you can blow this state and come out with like a Biden plus 16, like what's his name did.
And I still generally think, put it this way, it's easy to be wrong on the Democratic side in polling. That is facilitated by the media wanting to see that. Yeah. And by the Nate Silvers of the world fraudulently manipulating and encouraging and incentivizing it to happen.
Right.
So, for folks out there, by the way, Trafalgar, who called 2016 right, basically his polls say Trump is going to win. Patrick Basham, who called 2016 right, he says Trump's going to win. And I think he has the same map as me. He has all the same Trump states going Trump again, plus Minnesota, plus New Hampshire. And he has plus Nevada. And Nevada is very, very close. I'll get into that in a little bit. We have good intel and information on Nevada. I'll explain why John Ralston's still doing his math wrong. The Johnny Boy forgot when he was yipping away. He's accusing me of being a partisan hack and so forth. It's like, Johnny, do you remember what you said back in February? Because what John said in February was the Democrats were going to crush Republicans in voter registration, and the edge by election
didn't happen.
Going to be, quote, massive. It ended up being less than 2016.
Yep.
So Johnny Boy's making the same mistakes again.
So Dakota is, just to let you know, is 50-45 Biden. So that's actually just about what it was. That's right. Yeah. And what was the other one?
Scott.
Okay. I mean, some of these have small ones, some of these don't. Oh, come on, Scott. Where are you? Spin around, Scott. Yeah, I mean, some of them are tiny, some of them are not, but that's the Trump district. It just doesn't look that big. 52.94 for Trump, 33.2 for Biden.
And Scott.
Yeah.
Sweet. So the Scott is a county that has a certain religious group that has a Ben Shapiro type voter. So I thought Trump underperformed in Scott in 2016 because of that. And I thought if Trump was getting that voter back, it would show up in Scott. So even though that's much better than he did in 2016.
He's killing it in yellow medicine, but I mean, that's to be expected. But I mean, really killing it.
Well,
what was the other? There was one more, wasn't there?
Olmsted, we're going to look at Rochester.
Oh, right.
It's always hard to poll because Rochester trends one way and every place outside of Rochester and Olmsted trends the other.
I know. It's 52-48, almost dead on.
Okay.
So
very tight, just like it was in 2016.
Yep.
So
it is very tight.
That tells me it's going to come down to the wire. It's going to come down to turnout. But because he's flipping the iron range, it basically makes it a dead even race. Totally.
This is why he went back to St. Paul.
Yes, that's exactly
why he went back to. And by the way, I just want to say, when everybody was putting out Biden plus 15s in Michigan, Biden's own campaign had him down 1 point on Thursday. It was a true story. If you guys heard the whispers, that's right. Joe Biden's polling had him down a point in Michigan. And he called Barack Obama and said, I need your help because they're not going to come out and waiting for me. They made for you.
And what people don't realize, if you've been around politics, Richard's been doing this for 20 years. I've been doing this for 20 plus years in one way, shape, or form. And I learned a long time ago that enthusiasm is not something you can create by endorsements or organization. You cannot substitute for candidates. Candidates create enthusiasm. Nothing else creates enthusiasm. Every effort to substitute for it, and we've now seen massive voter by mail, massive big tech recommendations, massive big media manipulation, massive big money advertising. None of it got young people, millennial minorities, and other groups that were not excited about Biden to vote. And that's true everywhere. I mean, you're talking, in fact, I think my estimates were high. I think that, I thought African-American vote would be 11.3, 11.4 vote share, down from 12%. I think it's going to be 11%. I think it's going to be the lowest share of the vote since 1980. The youth vote, I thought, would be down from 14 to 12.5, 13. I think it's going to be down maybe to 11.5 to 12 of the vote share. Because in some of these places, they have to get absurd youth turnout. Like I was mentioning in Florida, they're going to have to get a third of the vote to be youth just to match 2016. If they didn't turn out in the presidential primaries, didn't show unusual enthusiasm in voter registration, in fact, just the contra in most instances, didn't show any interest. They were the ones tuning out and not tuning into the debates. It was that group that was leading to the ratings decline, and they didn't tune into the conventions, and they didn't vote early and vote by mail. Why does anyone suddenly going to wait in line and vote on election day?
And that's why I just don't see it. I really don't see that happening. And that's why I really, you know me, I don't like entering these realms, but I'm getting tired of the facades and the BS, Robert. So I just can't help but to tell everybody they need to stuff the ballot box for days and days and days. Listen to this. In Hennepin, we spoke to 218 people in Hennepin. Not a bad sample for Hennepin, all right? It is barely 61 Biden and 31 Trump. In 2016, Hennepin, folks, was 63 Hillary, 28 Trump. So, I mean, that's a nice chunk of our poll. It's about exactly what it's supposed to be, actually.
Exactly.
I mean, exactly.
If anything, he's trending just a little bit above.
He is, yeah. He's trending a little bit above.
African-American and millennials disproportionately not vote in terms of compared to the rest of the voter population. And one of the amazing things is all these media stories that put out that decontextualized information. So whenever you see some data point that has no context behind it, be skeptical of it. So there's always things like, wow, the youth vote is up 3 times or 6 times, depending on what metric they're using in Texas.
6 times what? Right.
But at the vote share, it's slightly less even in Texas than it was in 2016 because everybody's other age groups voted even more. So it's one of those useless points. It'd be like if somebody came to you and said, oh, man, Republicans are going to do great. The Republican vote is up 3-fold in our state. And if I ignored the fact that the Democratic vote was up 9-fold in the state, I didn't really give you helpful information. And that's what the press and the media is doing. To give you an idea of some of the deficit that is there, if like some people have asked you, why do I think Republicans will dominate Election Day? It's because it's what they've been telling people they were going to do for 6 months.
Yeah.
And we know in the voter file, we have people who have voted in every single election for forever who are still waiting to vote. This is what Biden's people aren't telling people. It only leaked out to Politico because a bunch of people were bitter that they know that a disaster is going to happen on turnout.
You see the Hawkfish memo?
No, I don't think I did see the Hawkfish. I just saw references in Politico where they're like, "Hey, it's not our fault that turnout sucks." And look at Mark Caputo and Matthew Isabel, all the Florida Democratic. They're conceding. It's over. It's done. It's finished.
I do. He wants Democratic candidates to win, but I think he'll either call it straight or he'll just go quiet. And if you guys watch my show I did on what I did was rewind Politico's coverage in 2018 because I was trying to demonstrate how badly they overestimated the MPA move to Gillum. And then the talk and the hype about it, that Gillum was winning MPEs by 20 plus, right? And then all of a sudden, at 7:30, it's hype. By 8:30, Robert, everybody went dark. And they didn't speak again until 1 o'clock in the morning when Mark put out a tweet that said, so I guess Republicans got the Election Day turnout they needed. That was it.
That's great.
It went totally dark.
He's admitting it now that they're just defeated. When guys like Matthew Isabel and Caputo are saying, Florida's not even really in play, when they've already given up before Election Day, that tells you what an honest. And here's the thing that people, again, American elections are correlated. So, by the way, guess who's discovered it? It's really hard to poll Florida. I don't know if you saw his tweet or Nate Cohn.
No, it's hard for you to poll.
Hard to get, and a lot of them trend Republican. He's already coming up with excuses of why his Florida polls
hard
are
for you to poll Florida, Nate. It's not hard for me to poll Florida. It's not hard for several. There are other good pollsters in Florida. There are, and what's it called? The Republicans. They have their pollster is a good pollster for Florida. I'm talking about. He knows what he's doing. And I gotta tell you. I mean, I told him what he did wrong already. I told him what he just wanted to bash me. He just wanted to cry and complain. Like, I'm not the one who missed independence by 10 points, dude. You are. All right. I'm not the one who missed that election.
There are these subgroups, and there's these rural whites in the Panhandle, and you can't.
You mean region and education, idiot? Region and education.
Cuban voters. It's hard to weight correctly for the Cuban voter. And he's already just explaining why his polls were, because he's figuring out, okay, we totally missed on Florida. Which, by the way, for folks out there,
Biden
as
plus
Florida
6.
goes, the Midwest goes. That has been true since 1968. This idea.
This is what I wanted to ask you. Can I just jump in before? Because you're going to say it, and I know you are. Robert, what Republican presidential candidate? This is why I've been so honest when people call me, and they're like, yeah, you have Biden up in Wisconsin. What could you say about that? And I'm like, I think I'm probably wrong. Right? Like, so at least I'm open about the difference, like the challenges that we face. Right. And these others are not, and they have such hubris. And I have to just ask them a simple question. What Republican candidate wins Iowa by 7 or more? Because that's going to happen. What Republican candidate wins Ohio by 4 or more? Because that is going to happen. Look at the Real Clear Politics average. That's a disgrace. And what Republican wins Florida all in the same time and night and does not win the presidency? Has that ever happened in the history?
I'd have to cross check. There's one election that when you test those things, always shows up.
You'd have to go to Nixon, and he got it robbed from him.
Yeah, exactly. Say it's the guy who probably did win that election.
He did,
declared the winner of the election, Richard Milhouse Nixon in 1960. But that was also, that election made sense because it was a Protestant Catholic divide.
That's right. Yeah.
So then you could see why Florida would trend one way and Wisconsin a different way, or other states a different way, where there's a big Catholic population. That's not the case here. It's since 1968 in the current environment, however Florida has trended, So has Michigan. So has Pennsylvania. So when you also have Iowa and Ohio trending also that direction, the idea that Trump is going to be swept out of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, while winning Iowa by almost double digits, winning Ohio by almost double digits, winning Florida safely because consider, I mean, anything over 3 is safe in Florida, given how close it is by its nature, given the locked in.
Yeah, it's always there. Yeah,
absolutely. The idea that the other states aren't going with them is just not holding up. Now, I'll give Seltzer credit. Clearly, she was so embarrassed.
She wasn't going on the wall of shame, bro.
Exactly.
She wasn't going on the wall of shame.
It would have been the end of her because after 2020, I mean, she's made her career as the gold standard of Iowa. And because there's big caucuses and presidential elections in Iowa, that's helped give her a national stage. And she's been wrong on the Republican caucus by all the time. That's because she can't get the evangelical share correct. But also sometimes that evangelical vote breaks late for the same reason in certain Democratic primaries.
Wisconsin too.
Yeah. And the other reason for that, by the way, folks, in the Iowa caucuses is you get delivered certain things when you walk out on Sunday as endorsements by certain religious organizations. So that's why if you time it right, you can have your vote break. Ted Cruz did this very well to Trump. He actually outmaneuvered Trump really badly there. That in Wisconsin, really the only 2 places he ever outmaneuvered Trump. Otherwise, Trump smacked that poor boy around. Given that dynamic, when you see something happening, like one of the things I do in betting elections all around the world, in global elections, is I look for some anomaly that doesn't make sense, and I bet on the anomaly occurring. And what I mean by that is here in the States, even if I didn't know the states well, if I knew the history of how Florida and Ohio vote, and I see both sides, Democrats and Republicans, agreeing that they're likely to go to Trump, then I would vote Trump in all the other places because I know that those are correlated events historically.
Right, Robert. So there's 2 groups in Iowa in Ann's poll that really should tell. And did you see Bill Kristol have a heart attack when that poll came out? Why? Because he recounted a conversation he had with a Republican friend who is pro-Trump, and he said 4 years ago when that poll came out, which, by the way, even though they're both +7, this one is actually even more favorable when you look inside the demographics in the groups. It is. So she understated his support share a little bit more last time. It was like 46 point something, and the Hillary was 39 something. And this time, because of the third party vote, what that showed is that Trump really did not lose those third-party voters to Joe Biden, like the narrative has been this entire time. If you look at the no college whites, that is the exact margin he stomped Hillary with. He won every single age group. By the way, the Iowa U straw poll was 56 Trump. 56. He won every single age group in 2016. Republicans don't win 18 to 29. And then you had the evangelical. I mean, we're just supposed to ignore all this, right? And then the 18 to 29, and then you have the no college. And then the last one, again, is that evangelical, because there are parts of Wisconsin. This is why Wisconsin fell first in 16. And I actually was stunned. I thought it was going to be, that was the state I thought, again, that I was wrong in. Wisconsin's hard to poll. All right. And I saw it went to a tie after routinely being Clinton 6, Clinton 5, Clinton 4, Clinton 6, and it went to a tie. And I'm like, things just don't move like that. But they did. They broke at the end for him. And it's because of these core groups, right? So he's killing, again, nationality wise, he's killing it with all the right groups. But that evangelical vote, if there was going to be some erosion, we would see it in Iowa and we would see it in Wisconsin, right? I mean, we were supposed to see this evangelical erosion. It's bigger in Ann's poll in 20 than it was in 16. And the funny thing about that is, while they're slightly smaller of a group in Wisconsin than they are in Iowa, and they're still huge, they're almost a third of the electorate, they actually broke by a bigger margin in Wisconsin for Trump than they did in Iowa. And our polling was pretty clear. We polled Iowa and Ohio twice. And it was pretty clear. It looked like to us that Iowa was going to return to its historical place as voting slightly to the left of Ohio all the time, whereas Ohio voted slightly to the right. Trump was the anomaly there in 16. Yeah. That was an anomaly,
only side fight, because the one point I was going to make out is the only time the rest of the Midwest doesn't go with Florida is usually because of the Norwegian vote in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and there, I think, percent, maybe not a huge portion, but still a portion in Iowa, some of those northern Iowa counties, so I think that's why if Trump does better in Iowa than he did in Ohio, it will be because that vote goes 2-1 in his favor rather than 2-1 against him, and that adds 2 points to the net margin. But I'll give Seltzer credit. Clearly what we predicted about Silver was true, because before Seltzer, there were a bunch of people pushing out some crazy numbers, inflating the edge, and Seltzer created a counterpoint to all of that.
He didn't bully her. Bully her.
So you're seeing, the Marist come in with very different numbers. They didn't inflate their last numbers. I mean, they're still wrong, but if Marist has Arizona, they haven't been as bad in the Democratic bias. Their bias has been bad in the Midwest, in the South. But like they have Trump only down 5 in Pennsylvania, and I think last time they had was like 10 or 11.
Yeah,
so
it was big.
Idea, yeah. So Trump is and by the way, all those boat parades and car parades clearly worked, because I saw Democrats on Facebook whining about it incessantly yesterday. They got stuck in a Trump car parade, and
I wanted to ask you about something.
They couldn't get around the cars. So
I wanted to ask you about something actually, but go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Finish your thought. I was just saying,
is good. Social proof is good. Primacy, recency. Everything's closing towards Trump. I haven't changed my bet. The only thing I may end up, I would recommend people bet Nevada, and I have some additional bets to go through with for people.
You don't think they'll just take that with those 200 ballots out in Clark County, those 200,000 ballots?
Two problems here. Reed isn't in functional control, just his old acolytes are. And there's a big gap in political talent between those two groups. That's becoming evident. Because here's why. What I was tracking was, if you were going to pad the ballots, you would already start having certain groups have a lot of ballots come in, at least in their name. You would want them in over these early voting period vote by mail.
Yeah.
They have extreme. I think they're just doing it straight.
What are they? A couple of thousand still behind in Clark County? Not much, but a couple of thousand.
Give people an idea. I mean, like I said, the New York Times said it would be D+8 here just a week ago. Said it would be D+8 here. It's D+3. It's a smaller lead than 2016, and it was supposed to be bigger. There's only about 7% of the whole state that has said in polls they plan on voting on Election Day. And but here's the number of that 7-2. It's basically 5-2 Republican if you amongst that 7. Gives you an idea. And for folks out there, last time they won D+4, and in Nevada that has been pretty reflective of what the electorate really is. In other words, you don't have as big of a party identification, party registration gap in Nevada as you do in other states, because you don't have the same ancestral history in Nevada as you do in other states. Like Arizona, it tends to be, both states tend to be, the party ID and party registration will be pretty close to each other. They won the 2016 early vote, they won it by 7, the early vote, and then on Election Day they ended up with it at the end of the election D+4, and they still only won by 2.5. That's because whether it's the crossover vote or whether it's the independent vote, Trump gets, whatever that margin is, it's going to be about 60% of it is going to be what what Biden's edge is. Now,
yet another reason, by the way, you shouldn't really take much of what Nate Cohen is putting. I'm serious. He's got Biden winning with independents everywhere, when even now multiple other of their favorite pollsters have shown Trump leading with independents in Nevada, even if he's down, leading with independents in Arizona, in Pennsylvania, even if he's down.
Even this cycle, YouGov had Trump up 7 amongst independents in Nevada. So what it was is independents in 2018 seemed to split even, but that was a very different dynamic. And what people still don't realize, I'll give an example with Texas. In Texas, between 2016 and 2018, there were 500,000 working class whites who did not vote in 2018, who did vote in 2016. And there were 250,000 college educated whites who voted in 2018, more than voted in 2016. So what you had was about an 800,000 vote turnout gap. Well, in a state with about 9 million votes, that's the entire margin of difference between Trump winning by 9 and Cruz winning by 3. So And if you look at the polls, you look at the early voting, it looks like there's going to be 600 to 700,000 voters on election day that are just working class whites, maybe up to 1 million in Texas. In fact, what's interesting is what it appears has happened is your college educated voter went ahead and voted early. Your working class white voter who said, I'm waiting until election day, did in fact wait until election day. And they are going to 80% of your turnout in some of these states, like North Carolina, like Texas, like parts of Florida, like Nevada, is going to be just working class whites. And it will tell people if Trump wins this way, it will remind them what we talked about all the way back before early voting, which was that my strategy is always hold at least as many votes as you can for election day, because what it does is it shocks the other side. I almost won a mayor's race this way. Held all my votes. They had no idea what was coming. My guy almost barely won. And it was a reminder of its effectiveness, because all these Democratic data analysts, except for Florida, in every other state, they don't know how to read the map. You have all these Texas people all excited. And it's like, you know what they should be looking at? They should be looking at Mexican West Texas. In the Democratic presidential primaries, there was a massive surge of voter interest in Texas, but not in one part of the state. In Mexican West Texas, the vote was flat. It didn't go.
In fact, even in the New York Times poll, Trump was doing exceptionally well out there. He was. That's why it was. I mean, you could argue that's why it was Trump plus 5.
Two things happening. It's like they've seen it in Florida, because you've seen the Democrats whine about it, which is the Hispanic vote that's not turning out, that was expected to vote, is a Democratic Hispanic vote that's not turning out. There's no problem with Hispanic Republican turnout. It's high. So the same thing in Texas. The lowest, there's two groups that haven't voted yet in Texas. Rural Mexican American Democrats, and I don't think they're going to, because they tried to drag them out and they still didn't get out. Just like the millennial Mexican American vote in this Democrat in Las Vegas has not voted in the share that they thought. And the other part is rural working class Texas and white Texas, that they're going to vote. They've been saying they're going to vote on election day. They turned out in presidential primary participation. Their voter registration data favors.
They sure as hell did, man. They sure as hell did.
Right? They're going to turn out in massive, massive margins. So but like in Nevada, just to give folks a breakdown of Nevada, they were supposed to be D+8. They needed to be at least D+8 to survive the onslaught on election day that Republicans were saying that they were going to vote, and Democrats were saying they were not going to vote on election day. Instead, they ended up with D+3. It is likely, this tells you how crazy it is, if the vote turns out the way people have said in the New York Times poll and in the CBS poll, YouGov poll Nevada will actually end up, in terms of turnout, Republicans will outnumber Democrats in this state. Whenever that's happened, the Republican has won. So
what do you think? Where do you think Washoe's going? I mean, that's really ultimately been the Republican problem.
It's going to be close. Here's the big thing that's happening. So Washoe basically is going to be a wash. I think it'll be pretty close to what happened in 2016.
That's all he needs. That's what he needs. Just basically a wash.
And here's where John Ralston's big mistake is made. He understands that rules are turning up at high levels. He's convinced himself that they're not going to continue to turn out on election day, despite saying they will.
I saw that. I did. Yeah.
And I disagree with him there. But even putting that aside, his big assumption is that Clark County could never vote more Republican than it did in 2016. That because Hillary won it by 10.7%, that Trump can't win it, can't reduce that margin into single digits. The problem is he's not paying attention to who's voting in early and who's not voting, and he's not paying attention to the internals. Because Trump in YouGov's polling, and confirmed by the New York Times polling, is running 10 points better amongst the Hispanic vote in Nevada than he was in 2016. And that's almost 20% of the vote.
Now, you can't do that though if you don't expand your independent margin significantly, then you can't do that unless you're cutting into Democrat Hispanic votes.
What he doesn't realize is exactly Trump's going to get it. So Washoe's going to be a wash. Rules are going to be even more pro-Trump and better turnout than 2016. Mormon vote is coming home. You combine those factors, and basically Biden is at 1.5. Then you look at the partisan gap. It says Trump's going to win outright. But let's say you ignore that. The fact we're going to go from D+4 to R-1. The other reason is in Clark County, Biden's not going to win by double digits. He's going to win by a high single digits. And if they
Right.
were to steal it, they should have already been stealing it by padding the ballot with certain demographic groups. They're not getting those votes. Put it this way, those voters aren't showing up, period. So it doesn't look like, it looks like they really believed they didn't need to steal it. They really believed if we just do massive vote by mail and have big tech reminding people to vote, everybody
that's-
hate Trump and they're just going to turn out. No,
That is what their game plan was, Robert. It is. It is.
By the way, for Joseph Cotto, if my theory turns out right, this is why you hold back some of your vote, because they don't realize that D+3 is a huge problem. They think that's still okay. All right, D+3. We ended up D+4 on election day last time. Okay, yes, that's pretty close. We'll be okay. They need to be at D+8. But they didn't realize that because they never even really looked deeply in the internals of their own poll. And because, but the big reason, if Trump voters had turned out early, then you would have seen more efforts to steal the ballots in advance. Now it's going to be hard to suddenly, are they after election day?
They are. That's what I was going to tell you with the hawkfish thing, though. They are. That's what I was going to, yeah, because they've realized now what you just said. Everything you just said, they've got that now. Hawkfish, funded by Bloomberg. They have come to the conclusion they will be, and they're calling it the red mirage. Okay. They realize that on election day, Trump is going to look like he has won in a landslide. I mean, of epic proportions. And they're afraid. And we used to call it the Gore loser. Okay. For people who aren't old enough and don't remember. Even people, look, Al Gore lost by 500 votes in Miami-Dade County. Okay. That's how close that election was, folks. And yet, the country soured on him. Even Gore voters after 2 weeks were like, dude, you lost. Get over it, loser. Move on. And that's what this is about. And they're focus testing. They got Jack over at Twitter. They got Mark over at Facebook helping to push. This is going to be a social media narrative. The media is, of course, going to get in. They're all starting to, they're already doing it, including Fox News, folks. So if you're conservative or a Republican and you don't know by now that Fox News is your Judas, then you better you better wake up because you're being deceived badly.
Their polling department. Because I mean, the polling department and
their editorials now too. With the exception of time.
But they're particularly people have asked me why they're polling in data is what it is. They're polling in data people are run by Democratic people.
Tim Murtaugh was right.
Yeah, the election night guy is a total. You can't rely on Fox on election night. It's a Democratic guy that runs their election data analysis. So that's not going to be particularly good at all.
Dude, it was crystal clear by 8:30 that North Carolina was gone. It was clear 2 days before, but guys, go back and look at the polls in North Carolina and you will see nothing but blue. Clinton plus, Clinton plus, Clinton plus, Clinton plus, Clinton plus, except for Remington Research, who put out Trump plus 2 or whatever it was, right? Yeah. And it was like in a sea of blue. Nate Cohen was Clinton plus 7, I believe. So just like about where he is now. I mean, so all this like talk. And by the way, so many people keep trying to skew and fudge the numbers for Pennsylvania, which I want to circle back to in a second because I want to ask you a question on it about something we found. But everyone wants to say, no, around this time, Biden has a 4.2 lead and Clinton had a 2 point. No, she did not. That was adjusted after the fact like they do all the time. Going into it, Monmouth was plus 7, Quinnipiac was plus 9. New York Times was plus 7. Franklin and Marshall was plus 11 or 12 or something crazy. They change it after for posterity, folks, to make themselves look better. It's getting to be a real scam. It really is, man.
And for folks out there, the key is comparing like pollsters. So one of the problems that's always been inherent with the averages,
the average is getting bad for that.
Election cycle to election cycles, you're getting different pollsters in those averages. Sometimes the same pollster using a different mode, using a different method. And what I mean by method is weighting.
IBD.
So like the
USD, IBD,
all the pollsters that were kind of Trumpish in 2016. I should say 3 that were calling it closer than others were YouGov, IBD, and and USC. All of them changed either their mode or method in this election.
Yes. And by the way, IBD only ended up at Biden plus 3. according to the experts at the Electoral College
So
model,
IBD. So I'll give IBD credit. They're at least didn't care what Nate Silver thought, so they were just gonna. But the thing is, IBD is inflating the youth share of the vote. Which, by the way, if IBD is saying +3, then that makes me think that Basham is it makes me think Basham is right that Trump may win the popular vote, unless they really pad the ballots in California. The other thing I think that will be different this time, at least so far, the areas that were low turnout Republican areas in 2016, so like places like Montana, the Dakotas, the rural West, parts of the border South, because they knew the election didn't matter and there was no real contested race at all on almost all their ballots, they just didn't turn. They turned out in below average expected numbers. While the big Democratic states, New York, Illinois, California, and remember Hillary had ties to 2 of those 3, senator from New York, born in Illinois, and California was in the middle of a Trump hatred frenzy.
It'll be worse this time, I think, Robert. I do.
Yeah,
Republicans left that state over the last 4 years, as our polling in Arizona has shown.
Well, and what Basham has is a D+2. And if that's, he thinks the electorate will move to D+2 nationally from D+4 in 20, and that would be consistent with Gallup's numbers. It would. So you add to that, but also if Republican turnout equalizes in all these states, it's because the popular vote became such a mantra. If a bunch of working class Trump voters vote no matter what they think their state's going to do, and there's signs of that in the Dakotas. Plus, I think the Norwegians are going to reward Trump big time for his anti-war position, even though he did not do the best job in his campaign hammering that issue down the stretch.
He didn't. He really didn't.
Major miss. It looks like they are still appreciative anyway. Probably because it's the first guy since Reagan not to start a new war someplace. And really the new guys, you could argue about
that shows up in our polling. Wisconsin, overwhelmingly. Pennsylvania, overwhelmingly. Michigan, overwhelmingly. When Robert and I tailored a question, it was his idea. Which candidate do you trust more to keep you out of foreign wars? It was Trump by like 20 points almost in most states.
He's going to sweep then, folks. He's going to sweep. I know those states. So my bet right now is he sweeps all 4. I have the closest, rather than being Minnesota, though Minnesota would be a logical.
Right here. You see the super chat question for you? I didn't want it to get lost before it ran out.
Pretty good.
It predict it's got.
I've already bet the other way. I don't have Trump losing a single state he won in 2016. And that's 5 to 1 odds. Isn't that crazy?
I would have said Arizona maybe until Laura and I were just like stunned. We were watching the rest of it come in. And sometimes when we do something to fill in the sample, it tends to get maybe a little bit more moderate, a little bit more female, but it's like we put it on hyper blast basically, right? And start really firing on all channels, right? And we're looking and it's like Maricopa's at already 62%. And there's still some and we're like, oh, well, who's left? Who's taking the survey right now, right? It's like moderate women in Maricopa. And we're like, oh, this is going to get ugly for Donald Trump. It didn't, right? It was like, Trump. We're like, what? I remember looking at the first one. And he pulled about even with Joe Biden in Maricopa. And he doesn't even need to be even. He just needs to be at a draw. But he was at even about 47.3 each after trailing Joe Biden by upwards of 6 or 5 points, whatever it was in the first poll, and then 3, and then even. And that was really, I think
Sorry, I was going to say, I have it closer in Arizona just because my theory is that
it may be.
If voter registration trends a certain way, the popular vote will too in that state. And because it's more Democratic in Arizona, I think it'll be closer. But he had a cushion to begin with. The only caveat to that was when we were discussing it when you polled Arizona, the 2 reasons why Arizona he could expand his ballot edge despite that is because if you look at the voter registration model that one guy did, Arizona, Trump underperformed the voter registration model in Arizona. It was the only state he did. And the reason for it, in my view, was you have 2 groups unique in Arizona. You had Mormon voters who didn't like Trump, and that group is coming back to Trump, and where Gary Johnson got an unusually high vote.
Yeah.
And the second group, now this group is still against him, but it's the old McCain never Trump type in Arizona. That's still
about 7%. It looks like about
So
7%.
That's why he'll never get net crossover votes in Arizona. 'Cause
No.
the Democrats are very, very locked in, and there's at least but he won't do as bad as he did in 2016. Because he'll get some of those. I think he lost double-digit Republicans in Arizona
I think
in
11%, right? 11%.
which makes it a big portion of that with those Mormons that didn't like Trump. They're coming home. So you bring in the Mormons, and then you add the fact that the number one group he's trending with of any demographic is Mexican Americans and Hispanics compared to 2016. By the way, Henry Olsen made the same mistake as everybody else. He's comparing the post-election Pew polls results to the pre-election results. So he's like, Trump is way down with working class whites. No, he's not. He was never down with. He's doing better with working class whites in the same polls, using the same methods at the same time frame as 2016.
That's right.
Missed working class whites
They
in those
keep
polls.
doing this, Robert. They keep comparing, and the suburban vote is the same thing. We had him consistently at 43, 45 in the Twin City suburbs, right where he is right now in our Minnesota poll. He won them 47, 45. Now, maybe he won't this time because of the third party drop off. Maybe not. We don't know. But same thing with Wisconsin. We had him about tied in Wisconsin in the suburbs, and the only reason why it was a tied poll is because his rural vote was so high. Now he's getting that high rural vote, and he's actually doing a little bit better in some urban areas. But the bottom line is, this is not. They're comparing polls to results, and the polls in 16 never predicted Donald Trump was going to win the suburbs. That was a stunner, folks. That's part of the reason. And again, our shy questions clearly identify those are the shy voters for the most part, or a large chunk of them. They are the shy voters.
Exactly. And there's more shy voters this cycle than there was in 2016.
Oh, there's no doubt.
More off than they were in 2016. So so that's where Henry Olsen just completely missed it. But basically, when you go look at Arizona, there was a cushion for Trump of some voters that were going to come back for him. That weren't those Mormon voters coming back for him, and in such a big Mexican American vote. If even though the Mexican American vote was going to be a higher share of the vote, which, by the way, in Texas, it looks like it's not going to be a higher share. That's how bad the turnout is amongst Mexican-American voters in Texas. The whole reason that state's trending Democratic, contrary to conventional wisdom, that it's the people coming in from outside the state. That's not why. It's because the number of Mexican-American voters who are 2-1 Democratic, their share of the vote keeps going up, and up.
Well, let's go ahead and answer this guy in Nevada before he has a coronary, and then I want to move on to Pennsylvania because there is a lot of questions about the Senate races, and let's hit them because we're burning through. I got
the Senate and the House to go through.
Okay, yeah, so what do you think? So Target Smart, I would caution you guys, but
that's the model data.
Target Smart on its page.
Yeah, the model data is 6,000. The Democratic data, I think, is around 40,000.
Yeah.
But that's what it was in 2016 with fewer voters. So that's their problem. If the polls are accurate, if either the New York Times poll or this YouGov poll of Nevada is accurate,
you'll be ahead on election day.
Then, yes, the Republican edge that's expected on election day is 60,000. So that means net 20,000 Republican edge. But John Ralston isn't dealing with this. He'll hint at it. He'll say, maybe there'll be big Republican turnout, but he hasn't, not a single one of the Democratic data analysts addressed the polls in saying, here's what the poll said was going to happen in the early vote. Did it happen? No, it didn't happen anywhere. And they were, Nevada was probably one of the worst, but in the end, it made sense. It's like, how could Nevada go from +2.5 Democrat to Trump winning if he's not moving the national popular vote by 3 points or more? It's because of the demographics of Nevada. Nevada has almost no post-college educated voters. That's the big trending Democratic group, only 7% population in Nevada. So number two, the Democratic group that is most trending Trump is overrepresented in Nevada. Mexican-American voters, about 20% of the vote, give or take. They're moving 10 points more towards Trump by every poll, even the media polls in Nevada, such that their increased share of the vote won't matter. And by the way, they may not have an increased share of the vote, but it may not matter if if Trump's doing 10 points or more better amongst them.
Much anyway. Right.
Third, there's a big Mormon vote, 5% of the vote. It trended against Trump, went to Gary Johnson. That vote was going to come home. So those turnout factors, the demographics of the state, and having above average Trump trending groups, below average anti-Trump trending groups, and how the turnout has turned out. It also may be the case that Harry Reid not being in the Senate made a bigger difference. Plus the lockdown here. I think the lockdown's more unpopular than people realize. But
you're not the first one to tell me in Nevada that there are people. I'm talking about Clark County. There are people who are, typical Democrats. Like, they're killing me. I can't live like that.
The other big factor here is the lockdown shut down a lot of the economies. There are a good number of voters that moved out of the state that were Democratic-leaning voters. Big problem is no Harry Reid machine, just his acolytes who may not be anything as powerful as his machine was. Look at the history of machines. When a real popular leader of that machine goes away, the machine tends to fray.
With it. Yeah.
And even though he was leaving, he was still around in 2016. And here's another example of that. There was a preview of that in the caucuses. Remember, Harry Reid hand-delivered Nevada to Hillary Clinton in 2016.
Absolutely.
Even though exit polls and others said that Bernie likely won the real vote. And there was ways he rigged the caucuses, which was smart. I'll tell people that story.
You can do that. And
my little sister actually lived it.
They flipped out, man. They
did all kinds of crazy stuff here. But notice in 2020, Bernie crushed here in the caucuses. So that may have been a sign that Harry Reid's machine was nowhere near as powerful as it used to be.
He put it in the gear for him. It did not come through. Remember, they were even going to get, huge black shares out of nowhere. And Bernie was doing well with them.
He did well in the old black machine precincts, but it wasn't consistent. In other words, if you had an African-American precinct that didn't have a local political machine in that precinct, its votes splintered everywhere. So that didn't happen when Harry Reid was here. So so that's problem one. They don't have the same machine. Problem two is the culinary union is not really doing anything because the economy is so crushed here. The culinary union is just not very active. So that's always been. Remember, people used to vote at the casinos on election day here. Yeah. That's not happening this time. So in any major number. So that's a huge problem. There are people who are just so convenient to vote because you showed up to work and then your workmate time to come over and vote. And that's not happening.
Do your duty, boy. Let's go.
Exactly. Well, and then the third thing is, to his credit, Adam Laxalt and others have been on top of it here, and the Trump campaign has been on top of it here. So they sued over a week ago to get access to watching the early vote count.
Yeah.
And even though they didn't get their remedy, it may have worked. In other words, they may have been sufficiently nervous to be like, we'll just run this clean. So I think all of those factors combined, if he gets an honest vote, Trump will win Nevada. That's my forecast.
Wow, that's a big forecast. All right, let me bring up something in Pennsylvania before we skirt over. And I will say, just as a real quick brief, everybody thought Joni Ernst, and I'll pivot right after this. Everybody thought Joni Ernst had made a bad political calculation by embracing Donald Trump. It was the only calculation. Only a stupid DC idiot, like, somebody whose initials are DW, would think that was going to work. You can't walk the fence in a state the president carried by, you can't straddle the fence in a state the president carried by 10 points and was probably in all likelihood, like I told you when we polled it and it was closer than Ohio, it still wasn't really close. So I really didn't understand where Ann came up with that, but I respect her. It's her state. You know what I mean? We couldn't get any closer than Trump +3, but it wasn't like Trump +10 a month and a half before, which was killer. Now it's going to be. 7 is probably light. She was light last time. So that's one seat that is off the table. Joni Ernst is going to win that race. The demographic shift in that last couple of weeks, Robert, forget it. She's got a huge election day lead. They will vote on election day, and Democrats, by the way, likely many of them will not, because it wasn't only the strategy that they employed, but listen, predictive indicators more than polling. Primary vote shares matter. And Joe Biden did a terrible job in Iowa. He met voters face to face and they didn't like him. They rejected him. Iowans are very good at that.
Third straight time they've done so too. So,
Third straight time.
Yeah,
Third straight time.
Third time was not. They told him in 1988, take a hike. They told him in 2008, take a hike. They told him in 2020, take a hike. By the way, as did New Hampshire.
That's right. Yeah,
somehow completely missed by the media and the polling analysts and the rest.
Nate only had +3 Biden, dude. Considering his polling bias, which is about 5-6 points at this point.
That's the youth vote, folks, so far in New Hampshire. 4% of the vote.
Yeah.
Trump lost it by 3,000 votes.
That's it. Because
that youth vote being gone,
that's
gives
one
Trump the election. Biden has to do better, 5 to 10 points better in the southern suburbs for him to hold New Hampshire. And I'm not so certain that's going to happen. Yeah. Basham has New Hampshire going to Trump. Like I say, he has the same map as me, just he adds Nevada, and I'm at 50-50 right now on Nevada. But though I'm leaning more and more because I thought it would be D+6 in the early vote, and then it would be close. It's D+. I mean, if it's R-1, R-2, and the big problem that John Rawson said it would take a miracle for Trump to win. He's going to have burned up his credibility in this one because he'd accurate. What people had missed is, other than 2014, where he accurately forecast Republicans doing well, but that was an easy election to forecast that due to the massive Republican edge in early voting. Every other election, he's been able to call it for Democrats, so it wasn't like he was necessarily that accurate, but he had been at least a little bit more objective before this one in terms of the early vote calculus. He's hedged a little bit, but not to the degree he needed to. I think he'll have damaged his credibility just as he damaged it by predicting Democrats would dominate voter registration.
1 or 2 points he's damaged it because the way he's talking, he did though knock the 6-point Biden lead. He did. There's no doubt he knocked Nate's. He was like, there is +6 is not happening. All right. That's what he tweeted that the other day.
To his credit.
So before we get on to, I don't know what other stuff we could talk. We talked Minnesota Senate seat, but in Pennsylvania, Robert, Lackawanna County is the Democratic stronghold, and Biden is supposedly the hometown Scranton boy. All right. We have consistently been polling Pennsylvania now. I've been polling it since the end of summer. All right. And they have traded leads there. Traded leads. Trump I think people, because a lot of people are like, I don't know. That sounds a little bit too favorable. It's important to note he almost took Lackawanna last time. Monroe is on the cusp. I think Monroe's going. I do. And I think Luzerne is probably going to be 20, 25 points Trump. I have right now, as of last night, Lackawanna, who Biden was just leading 52-47. So something happened. All right. Something actively happened. I don't know what it is, but something actively happened. The rise in the number of people who say they've heard about the Biden reports, that's gone up. Maybe I don't, that's in the 80s now. Maybe that's it. I don't know. And it's among older voters, but we got Trump. It's, it's good. It's a small sample comparatively, but we got him up 48-44.
That wouldn't surprise me. Basham also reported that in the Midwest, and people can look up the polling results. I think it's in the Sunday Express, the UK Sunday Express, has the Patrick Basham final numbers for Trump, but they reported unusually high numbers, well, at least compared to what they expected for the Hunter Biden story too. And that everybody hears the story. The key with that story was just get it out enough for people to attach the word corruption to Joe Biden. That's it. Trump didn't need to do any more than you don't need people to know the breakdown of the story. You just need people to know corruption, Biden. That's the whole. And I think Trump, what helped up there was all those rallies. So because what people don't realize with the rallies is local news covers any rally that occurs.
Yeah.
So do interviews with local news. So what happens is, particularly your older voter, because you're saying it's the older voter in particular, your older voter is who watches
in the 90s now.
Yeah, they watch your local news. And so what happened is over the last week, all of Trump's rallies in every single media market in Pennsylvania meant that your ABC, your CBS, your NBC, your local Fox affiliate, they all reported Trump talking about that. it's the only, if you're a local reporter, what's the new angle? It can't be just Trump's here. It's going to be Trump accuses Biden of scandal, Hunter Biden, that's what it will be. And so that's why he hit those. That's why those local rallies are secondarily important. Like people are wondering, why does Biden even do a local rally? I think it's kind of still a mistake, but it's so he can interview local press. But they're doing it in that moronic pandemic-induced way. I get trying to communicate, be afraid, be afraid, be afraid. But when you're Biden and you're being accused of corruption, you having an interview with a guy 100 feet apart from you just reinforces what are you scared of? Why are you? Yeah. Even though you're trying to talk about the pandemic, the visual is this guy wants to keep a distance from the press. This guy wants to keep away from questions. It's bad visuals if you understand visual methods of persuasion. But that's the other reason why Trump did it with all of these rallies, is to reinforce to the local media market. And Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, first time they've endorsed Trump. I think if a Republican in forever, they endorsed Trump.
1972, my friend, since 1972. And we do have him touching 40% in Allegheny now. He's there. So that does not include anyone who read the Pittsburgh Gazette. He just got there. And for on-off, yes. That's what I'm saying. Our Pennsylvania now, when it updates, it'll be 48-48, basically. 48,
the only way Biden could lose Pennsylvania and still win the election is he's got to hold all the other states, and he's got to flip Arizona, and he's got to flip Nebraska too. So
yeah.
That is
Nebraska too may go. It's that kind of, I don't know, man.
The only thing is they said that last time and ended up not being as close as they said.
That's true, because the Shaw suburban voter, if it plays,
the House candidate, the congressman there was going to lose, and he didn't.
Yep.
So that's true. There is an above average post-college voter there trending, and it's just, if you couldn't flip it in 2018, I don't see it flipping 2020. So I think that's my thing with that. And there's a place where you would have a lot of people wouldn't think of it, but because there's a big post-college population outside of Omaha, in that part of Nebraska too, it would be a place where you would have a lot of shy Trump voters, because if you work in that community, you're not. And I've been hearing from people in those kind of communities all across the country, saying, "Hey, thanks for this. I can't talk about this publicly. Don't." And then did the etc. So
right, how many emails do we get around the country saying, you know what, I got to tell you, I really enjoy the work you're doing trying to identify the shy Trumper. I am a shy Trumper. There is no way I would tell you the truth if you called me. I don't care if it's on the phone. You tell me it's anonymous. I don't care if it's in our closet. I'm not telling you because you may leak to a coworker and I'll get fired. I'll get abused. How many of these emails do we get a week? I don't even know, Robert. I mean, it's like crazy. So I know they're real. And then, by the way, you see Robert from Trafalgar, he retweeted somebody who took a screenshot of his thing. He was taking a poll, and he was like, haha, I lied. And there's like, I stop doing that, because I can see clear as day when someone's lying. The difference is, again, I'm not going to change it. I'm not, because in my experience, it's just like, it gets subjective then. It's when does it end? Maybe this one's lying too. You just can't do it.
Different metrics.
I maybe others want to do it, fine, but I'm not.
Yeah, again, it's just a different. As long as I think people are transparent about it, I think that serves the purpose.
Right.
So I can't be moving it like Trafalgar and Basham do, because their purpose is to forecast the election. Your purpose is just to measure opinion. But as long as if people know, hey, by the way, it says, say, Biden up 2 here, but there's as much as 3% of the vote that may be shy Trump vote based on the internal questions and demographics of that group. And so, you make your assessment accordingly.
I really enjoyed conversations with plurality vote. I always love that word. They were like, they contacted me and they were just like, hey, listen, we saw your Pennsylvania poll, because now we know. I mean, it's there. It's there. And by the way, they're leaning to Trump. They're leaning to him. People don't understand what that means. Biden has maxed out. He has no more votes to get in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, even Minnesota, it looks like. Arizona, he did tick up a little, but his leaners leaned first, and then he was done. because we did it over 3-week period. So his voters were like undecided, maybe 4 days, 5 days later. All right, I'm leaning, I'm going with Biden. And then what was left on the table was so overwhelmingly Trump that the totality of the undecided vote was still 3-1. So, I mean, in some states, most of them are like 2-1, but some have been 3-1. Minnesota was 3-1. So, I mean, and then with Pennsylvania leaning, so they called, they contacted me and they were like, can you talk a little bit about the uncertainties that you see in the poll? Because we built this model when this is what goes in it. It's really cool. If you guys haven't checked it out, just check it out. And they're outliers because they had been showing that Iowa was never going to go to Biden. It was like some 90% chance it's going to Trump. Iowa, Ohio, very strong for Trump. And they have other metrics that they put into it, outperform polling averages, and they're like, there is no doubt Pennsylvania leans Trump. It leans Trump and all these metrics. And can you tell us what could possibly throw off some of these polls? And then we talked about it. And then Wisconsin as well. I'm like, look, even forget about the partisan lean. Forget about it. Because partisanship is partisanship, and they do their best to try to infer. Demographics, period. It is more male. It is more working class. It is more rural. It's just not the typical, kind of thing. Hang on one second. Can you tell her I am on the phone? I am busy. I am on the podcast. That is 5 calls in a row. If I miss something, my bad. But for the love of God, if I don't call you back, I don't call you back, right?
Well, I always have my phone on silent, but of course I get into trouble for that. But it depends on the industry.
What other Senate races are we missing, Robert?
I'm going to go through. Yeah, so here's all the different predicted markets that I would add. So and I'll get into the Senate as part of this, and the House as part of this. So for the presidential race, you can bet on different, Trump to win by 1, by 2, by 3, by 4. And I recommend you bet on all of them within certain ranges. And you'll be betting like $8 to win $92. And you aggregate all of those, he's only going to win in one of those categories. But because of the payoff, it ends up being like a 2-1, 3-1, 4-1 bet. So I have Arizona, Trump by 1-4. Pennsylvania, Trump by any, just to win, period, by any margin. By all of the margins that are listed there. Iowa to win by 6 or more. Texas to win by 4 or more. North Carolina to win by 4 or more. Georgia.
Ooh, that's a big bet. Really? That's a big bet.
Here's why on North Carolina. 3 things. 1, the voter rate. He almost won by 4 in 2016. Number 1. Number 2, the voter registration date has been massively moving towards Republicans. And 3, and there's a history of that pretty well tracking and forecasting the election as a voter registration model done by, I think, the Real American was who did it. But and then early vote. The African-American vote share will be the lowest vote share of the early vote it has ever been in North Carolina. And the millennial vote down too, not having colleges as active as they should have has hurt them in North Carolina. So between the youth vote decline, the African-American vote decline, the voter registration trends, plus pre-existing data in North Carolina, plus how the demographics play out for Trump in North Carolina, I have him winning by more than 4. In Georgia, Trump to win by 4 or more. Florida to win by any margin between 0 and 6, because all of them are good value. That all of these bets, if you took on Predict It, are between 2-1 to 4-1. Ohio for him to win by more than 3.5. To bet against 538, you can now there's a market now in Predict It where you can bet against whatever the 538 national polling average is.
Joke.
And so the national polling average is probably going to finish around Trump losing by 8 or more.
Yeah.
So my view is to bet that market is off by 6 or more. You can bet all the way up, and you get very good odds on that. So that's the presidential elections, plus all the states that I previously mentioned, Nevada, but adding Nevada, New Hampshire, and Minnesota is good bets, plus every state that Trump won in 2016. The only state on the Democratic side, I would bet on every Democratic state that they won other than those states, and I would not trust Colorado. I think Colorado was still safely Democrat, but not at the margin that's being talked about. On the Senate, here's the Senate bets that I have. Republicans to win Alaska, Texas, South Carolina, Kansas, Georgia, not the Georgia special election. I would wait on that, but
that's a hold. Yeah.
But the regular Georgia election, I believe Purdue will hold.
It looks like Doug Collins took the lead though over there on Kelly Loeffler at the last minute. It does.
I think that would be better, frankly, for the Republicans.
Me too.
But the reason there's a risk there with the Georgia special, if there's a runoff and Trump wins, then that seat may flip with unusual turnout. That tends to happen. If, on the other hand, Trump were to lose, it will be a safe Republican seat. But Iowa for Ernst to win. Minnesota, just because the odds are 4-1 or 5-1 for it to flip, and because Lewis has a history of overperforming, and the Democratic candidate is nothing like Klobuchar or Wellstone in depth of popularity. But X factor there is the Norwegian vote. Arizona, I still like McSally because the odds are 4-1, 5-1. So even if she should be an underdog, not that big of an underdog. Maine, I think Collins is going to hold, and again, she's a huge underdog there, so it's worth the odds. Kentucky,
Maine is so hard to pull, Robert. It's so hard to pull.
And by the way, Collins has always overperformed her numbers.
She does. Yep,
that's poll ever.
Absolutely.
And even in these polls, they have her running 5 to 6 points better than Trump. If that holds up, she's winning Maine. Kentucky, any Republican state that's less than 90%, like McConnell in Kentucky, that's a lock. That's not close.
I know some stuff is just crazy, brother. It's just crazy.
And I would make James an underdog, but not the size of the underdog that he is in the betting markets. Montana, I think the Bullock has made a range of mistakes, so I think Republicans will hold Montana. Alabama somehow is sometimes less than 95 or 96%. There's no chance Alabama's flipping to the Democrats. It's flipping to the Republicans. North Carolina, again, Tillis is an underdog. I think he wins outright. I think Republicans do hold the Senate. I don't think there's a Democratic sweep. And what I'm betting on is between our Republicans gaining 2 seats and Democrats gaining 2 seats. You can bet on those metrics. And I'm betting against Democrats winning 4 or more because I don't see the Senate flipping. The idea that they'll pull, they basically think they're going to flip Maine, flip Colorado, flip Arizona. What was the 4th state they think they're going to? And then they think they'll get at least 1 or 2 upsets between Iowa and Georgia and Alaska and Montana. And some of them think
not getting Iowa. It's over.
Yeah, Iowa's finished. It's done.
It's over.
Yeah. And Ernst did a good job in the debates there. And I am a little bit more suspect of Seltzer. I've been having a little. Here's why. Seltzer's had a habit of not having if the Republican is doing well, she tends to not show it until the eve of election. That's all I'm going to say. So
I'm with you. Look, Robert,
we starts to become a little bit of a pattern, especially after what she did in the caucuses.
This is what I'll say. This I'm going to say this. We polled the same time Seltzer polled and found Trump +10. We also it was like +9. All right, so right there with her. Then she came out with a Biden +2 or a Biden +2 or something when we were still Trump +3. All right. I don't know how that happened when she overstated Trump the first time.
Independents don't flip by 25 points either.
They don't do that, Robert. They don't.
She keeps getting Democratic leaning independents
or something.
The election.
Yeah, it's response bias or something. I don't know, but she should know that. I mean,
she's doing something with those weights.
And then the spiking of the CNN poll.
No, the Democratic caucuses was showing Biden collapsing, and her eve of where she got her reputation actually wasn't general elections. It was predicting the Democratic caucus performance, not the Republican caucus performance, where her polls have been off consistently.
She was an outlier with Obama, and she nailed it or got very close. And look,
same with Bernie Sanders in 2016. She showed that very close when other people. And so people are like, wow, she's got this voodoo reputation. She really nails it. And so her coming out saying Biden collapsing could have been the end of Biden's campaign.
Yeah.
And they buried the poll based on some nonsense about 3 or 4 people getting some numbers wrong, which they
just tell you what that
reason.
Just from a pollster's point of view, and it's not because I'm some right-wing pollster. Even Patrick Murray at the Monmouth poll called BS on this. That one interviewer maybe spoke to a handful of people. That's it. They could have easily parked those responses, junked them, and then just ran for another day or whatever, put somebody else in the seat. That is not how this works. All right. The idea that maybe one interviewer had a question cut off or a name cut off from the screen because they had their zoom in too much. So you spike the whole poll. Folks, that's crap. They're lying. I'm sorry. They're lying. There's no other explanation. And I'm stunned. Of course, they are the client. So if they spike it, but she made it out like it was Seltzer and company's decision to pull that poll. And so if it was her client's decision and they made her go along with it, why on earth did she take the fall for that? When, I mean, if it was me and that was the Epoch Times, it would have been like, they spiked that poll. I don't think, it belongs to them, so they can release it or not, because it's not my property anymore, because that's how it works when you poll for a media outlet. It's not my property or any client. It's not my property anymore. So have at it. But I found, there's no reason why we couldn't have just maybe what? I mean, really, what are we talking about? Maybe 10 to 25 respondents. So what? So what? Easily could have fixed that. It just made no sense. In the House, though, I will say this. Iowa is always, or has been in the past, a bellwether in the House. I'm not saying it's enough for Republicans to take the House. I'm simply not saying that. But I am saying that the Seltzer poll did lend credibility to the Bloomberg story about at least 8 Democrats who thought they were safe now fighting for their political lives. And that means there are seats that are, and by the way, doesn't that blow a hole in Mr. Wasserman block you? Doesn't that blow a hole in his whole theory about the district level polling? Listen, when it was Trump plus 10, Republicans were going to take all 4. Now they're taking 3 out of 4. And by the way, if Trump overperforms, they may still take them. So that's a seat that's gone already. That's one seat that it's gone. So obviously what she is saying there nicely is, you were a first term and only term representative. You're gone. And it'll be a short career. Enjoy it. But that's what happens in 2018. They took those districts from They took that district from Republicans. So, and the rest of the country didn't go so well for them. That you have to think then Minnesota. We're talking about similar demographics here. You have to think the district in Minnesota. You have to think, I don't know if we can apply that totally to some areas in Pennsylvania, but I have seen Trump's no college share now. I'm not talking about white. I'm talking about no college overall. Now just about the slap 60. And that is where he needs to be, because that means with whites, he's at like 62. So that is where it's got to be, folks, for them to cause an upset. It really is.
And for that, here's the House. 2 things on the House. I'll have individual House seat predictions and the global House predictions. Here's the context. In 3 prior elections, there has been a sweep out of power of the incumbent party when the incumbent sought re-election. Yeah. What happened in that next House election? Well, in 1946, Republicans won by 8 the national House vote. In 1948, Democrats took back the House and won by 7, 15-point swing. Yeah. 1994, Republicans win the House vote by 7. And what happened in 1996 ended up being dead even. Now, because of gerrymandering, well, not gerrymandering, because of the regional effect, my Democratic friends would say gerrymandering.
Yeah. They gerrymandered the entire 20th century. They get a little bit of medicine, their own medicine, and they cry like babies. That's the truth.
Exactly. So the national vote was +0 in 1996. Republicans held the House, but it was a 7-point swing again. So a 15-point swing in 1948 toward the incumbent party, 7-point swing in 1996. The next time this happened was 2012. Republicans won the House vote by 7 in 2010. They lost it by a point in 2012. Still managed to hold on because of that advantage that they have, but that was an 8-point swing. So if we get the lowest of those swings was 7 points, if we get a 7-point swing, given that the real popular vote was +7D because it was an unusual number of uncontested races in 2018, that would be +0. And +0, it means Republicans win the House. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen, but that gives you the historical comparison. People that think
Obama some back, Robert, he didn't win the House back, but we saw him take it some back. Yeah,
seats back. And the key factor in this is that in these latter two elections, the Republican, since 1994, Republicans have an institutional edge in the House.
Yeah.
In other words, there's more House seat. The average House seat is 4 points more Republican than the country. So what that means is typically, if it's D+3, Republicans take back the House in all likelihood. Now, unless incumbency plays a role. Now, prior to 2018,
TIP doesn't do a generic ballot, right? But the USC does, right? And they had like an 8-point bias or a 7-point bias in 2018.
Exactly. And they have it 8 points closer. If you take the USC poll, they have their generic ballot moving 8 points more Republican since their 2018 ballot.
Well, that's seats, brother. That's a lot of seats.
And there's a whole bunch of other polls. Generally speaking, the generic ballot has been closer this year than 2018.
Yeah.
And remember that historically, they overfavored Democrats by 3 to 4 points in that generic ballot. In fact, the 538 average was overinflated Democrats even in 2018 by 3.5 points. They were predicting a 10.5 point polling win, which would have been the equivalent of a 12-point win given the uncontested races.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, what I'm betting against, you can bet against the Democrats winning 206 or more seats, 200, different ranges. But basically, I'm betting against Democrats having 234 or more seats. I do not believe Democrats are going to pick up net seats.
We're not saying the Republicans are going to flip the House. Did you not hear what we just said? The historic, if Trump wins re-election, history will say that they will recoup some of their losses. Yeah. But it'll have to be an epic landslide for that.
If incumbency is inconsequential, like it was in 2018, then I believe Republicans will take back the House. Now, in 2018, I bet on incumbency mattering because prior to that, it always had. To give you an idea, here's what the curve would look like. It was like a U curve. Let's say Democrats won by 7. In a typical midterm election, they would win by 10. Their Democratic incumbents would run 10 or 11 points above their typical margin, but Republicans would run in the Republican-held incumbent districts. Democrats would only run 3 to 4 above their margin. There was a 3, 4 to 5 point Democratic edge. You can look at what the Brennan Center put out in 2018 about this. Yep. So in 2018, and that didn't happen. On neither side, Democrats won by 7 in incumbent Democratic districts. They ran 7 points above average. In Republican incumbent districts, they ran 7 points above average. If that happens in 2020, then it's better than 50-50 Republicans take back the House. I still find it weird that incumbency was inconsequential in 2018.
There could have been a lot going on there, Robert. There were a lot of factors. Yes. And so then they were parking. They did a very good psychological operation, basically all over the place where they needed to. They parked independent candidates that they funded and supported, and that peels. There's a lot of research to suggest that there is, and now we've identified them. I think those independent, moderate, conservative men, they will not vote for the Republicans if you don't like. They'll vote for Trump, but they won't vote for a Republican candidate just because they have an R next to their name. If they see something like independent, they'll go, you know what? Let's go with that one. That's just the way it is. So it'll siphon. We're talking of only a few points, but Democrats won a ton of seats by only a few points.
The key for Republicans to take back the House is they need non-college, non-Hispanic, white independents who self-identify as conservative in the Sun Belt, self-identify as moderate up north, that are voting for Trump for 95% or more to vote down ballot Republican. That may happen, but as Richard's seen in the polls, and so far the good news in the polls is they're not voting Democrat. The bad news is they're not voting Republican either. They're disproportionately under some ballot will play a major role. Now, to their advantage, Republicans have not made the Heck mistake. Heck in Nevada killed his candidacy for the Senate by deciding to abandon Trump right before the election. All it did was sink him when people thought he was a lock to win, even with Trump losing Nevada. He
bought into the narrative we're hearing right now. That's what happened. He bought into that narrative.
My own view was never vote for a guy named Heck anyway.
Laura's cracking up. Can you answer this guy's question? How on earth is one able to legally bet on the race in the USA? Where does one start as an ultra beginner? And then we'll get the second one.
Predicted.org. So it's I think it's an Australian based, but they're given a legal exemption in the United States. My view is political betting is not gambling. It's just like trading futures on the stock market, because true gambling legally in America is defined as a game of pure risk. So this was the debate that goes all the way back to fantasy football. Betting is not pure risk. It's not like I'm throwing a dice on the roulette wheel and seeing if it pops up Trump, Nevada. The
strategy.
It's strategy and skill. And so from that perspective, I don't see it as gambling. It's in a gray zone. It's never legally been defined one way or the other. It was seen as probably legal by the Justice Department back when the Irish company Intrade was operating. But then the Justice Department didn't confirm that in 2016. So Intrade quit allowing U.S. markets, U.S. customers to be involved. If you're international, there's a bunch of books. Betfair is the best. But if you're inside the United States, the only one you can do so safely. Now, there are a bunch of sports books that will take your action around the world because they think it's legal from the United States. Bovada, Bet Online, a bunch of them. So for some people, that's where they're putting their money. But the only one where it's safe and legal and everybody agrees it's legal and there's no dispute, no controversy, no question, is Predicted. Now, they limit how right now people are apparently so many people have bet on Trump and Predicted that
they're not taking anymore.
Yes, the straight up Trump one they're not taking. But folks, there's a whole bunch of ways to bet on Trump. You can bet on him by state. You can bet on the Democratic winner of the South Carolina primary to not get elected. Democratic winner of Massachusetts, not because these were markets they designed for the primaries, but they still apply to the general election. You're betting against Biden. So it's the same thing, but those markets are less traded. So they haven't hit a cap. You can bet up to 850 per bet effectively.
That's a pro tip right there.
Yeah.
That's a pro tip. All right, so the chances that Trump wins Florida by 4, I mean, I don't know.
I have the median at 3. So
yeah,
I'm 0 to 6 because you can bet on Trump anywhere in that range, 0 to 6, and you're getting better than even money. So that's where the money is because 6 or more I don't see happening, but under I think 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5 is where I would put the range.
Because really, if everybody is totally wrong about MPAs, not everybody, by the way, not everybody. If they're wrong, all it would take for a 4-point win, given what we're seeing right now in Miami-Dade and Collier County. And did you see the Villages, by the way? The idea that Biden is going to win that. Robert, we really delude ourselves. We really the
guys that torch their reputation in this, Elliot Morris, 97% chance Biden wins. He put out some data that said, hey, one reason why was because Biden did well in white working class areas. And I was like, what is he talking about? And then I went back and looked. He's talking about the share of the vote Biden got while ignoring the fact that white working class turnout was down in the Democratic primary.
Absolutely. That's why he won Minnesota and Maine. That and the last minute rally cry to him. That's all. They weren't voting for him. And that's 35% right there, buddy. That's it.
Their turnout share was down. So to give people an example, like I think some people misunderstood my presidential primary participation rate. It's not so much how much vote Trump gets versus the Democratic candidate. I look at that, but it's not the number one factor. To give you an idea, in 2012 in Wisconsin, Republicans got 2.5 more times voters than Obama did in the presidential primary. So that's not the only thing I do say is if Trump got more votes than the leading Democratic candidate did in the state, then that tends to be a barometer of trouble for the Democrat. That's true in Wisconsin.
98.2%.
Guess what else is true? For all those people saying Texas is flipping, Trump got more Republican presidential primary votes than the top 4 Democratic presidential primary candidates got combined.
Yeah.
So the idea that Texas is flipping is living in la-la land.
Those 293,000 Bernie votes in Wisconsin are just Biden's because they're Biden's. Were they not paying attention in 2016? Were they not paying attention?
Wisconsin's like Michigan is an open primary. So so a bunch of independents just tend to vote in whatever's the contested primary, but they're not locked in Democratic votes.
And in fact, you'd see that in the inference in the voter model, because that's why the voter models update, folks, because they don't have registration. So the participation in those primaries is what knocked it more R. You understand what I'm saying? So people, they already knew, and that's baked into those Democratic numbers that I showed you before. And yet it is still R+8.
The fact that Trump got more votes than Biden in Wisconsin was a bad sign for Biden. Like if I was running Biden's campaign, that would make me highly sensitive to it. And what I look at is demographics. So like in Michigan did have great Democratic presidential primary turnout, but it was also the big contested race where independents could vote in the Democratic primary.
Yeah.
But the thing I paid attention to was you have a 25% increase in Democratic presidential primary voting, but the county that's down, that's around 10 to 15% increase, is Wayne.
Yeah.
What it is that's showing black voters are not interested. Just like you had this surge of interest in Texas, 50% increase in Democratic presidential primary voting in Texas, but not in Mexican-American West Texas. So what that tells you is when you see lack of enthusiasm from minority millennials in the presidential primary process relative to other population groups in vote share, that almost always predicts what their turnout pattern is going to be, and the early vote has confirmed that to the nth degree.
Let me ask you this with this super chat. What the hell is with this drive-by voting? How are they allowed to do this? This is against the state law. I don't understand how the judge upheld this. This is crazy. And I know they got another emergency hearing. Did that judge rule yet or not?
Not to my knowledge. That judge is a real conservative Republican judge, so it was anticipated he might rule in their favor. But the flip side is the Texas Supreme Court refused to get involved. The choice of Justice Barrett sent a message. So Barrett not getting active and doing anything on the Supreme Court level. Because the Texas Supreme Court, by the way, 7-0 Republican, and they refused to get active. So,
by the way, Lindsey Graham made an open comment about how, you remember that, Laura? He made an open comment the day of the debate, and he had said, you know what? It don't matter because they're not going to be counting those ballots anyway because Amy Coney Barrett will be on the Supreme Court. In other words, it was a wink and a nod to us that, don't worry, she's got our back. And
first vote she does is not vote at all. So and when Texas Supreme Court 7-0 Republican, when they see the U.S. Supreme Court saying don't get involved prior to the election, they follow the message. And they're like, even though there's issues about what happened with the ballots and how they were gathered in Harris County, Justice Barrett just said stay out effectively by her not voting. So they took the message. And that's what's happening. And so but none of that's going to flip it, folks. People that think Texas is competitive. Here's what's coming out on election day about 700,000 to 800,000 working class rural whites in places like Van Zant County, one of my favorite named counties in the country, that hill country, East Texas. Old school populist. And if you look at the presidential primary rate, you know what kind of numbers are going to be coming out of those counties? They're going to look like core inner city precincts voting for Obama in 2012. You're talking 94.6, 95.5. Absurd numbers never seen since the 1940s. And back then it was on the Democratic side.
And Scott, as far as Georgia goes, I would be more worried if I was a Republican about Arizona next time. I really think that one was really close.
These people that think Georgia has to have a weird turnout. Look, folks, in 2018, they couldn't win the governor. Plus 7 environment. That means it leans 7 points more Republican than the country. The same thing in Texas. Like when they're making all this big deal about Ted Cruz is within 3 points. I was like, folks, it was a D+7 environment. That means it's 10 points more Republican than the rest of the country, almost exactly like 2016. So Georgia, I have Georgia vote Trump for not only vote for the Republican to win the Senate seat there, the regular Senate seat, wait on the special election seat because whoever wins the White House will dictate that potentially. But the advantage, even though you can bet as an underdog right now, so it may be a good bet. But I have Trump winning by 4 or more in Georgia. All this talk of this huge vote surge, the African-American vote share is less of a vote share than it was even in 2016. And it was supposed to be up. It was supposed to be 33 to 35% of the early vote. It was not.
On Georgia. Go ahead, though. Go ahead. Wrap up what you were saying. I'll spit out something when you're done.
Yeah, so that's all I have. I do have individual House seat predictions, too, as to what I think will happen. I am betting against the Democrats gaining seats. There is probably good money on betting the Democrats. If you want think the Democrats are going to lose the House, it will likely be by a small margin. So you can bet on Democrats to have between 210 and 217 seats at like 8-1, 10-1 odds. So actually, one of those was 30-1 odds. So you can get some crazy odds that are probably worth it. I think about a 1 in 3 chance Republicans take back the House. But again, that's because I like 2018 and believing incumbency will matter. I may be wrong on that. Again, 28, maybe something new is happening. The whole key is, do working class independents who like Trump vote Republican down ballot? They did not in 2018. Now, a lot of them just didn't vote in 2018. Turnout alone will help a lot of these close seats.
And go ahead.
Oh, and so I'll run through quickly the House seats that I'm betting go Republican. Arizona 6, California 21, California 48, Florida 15, Georgia 7, Iowa 1, Iowa 2, Iowa 3. I think they win 2 of the 3. But actually, all you need to do is to win one of those 3 and you make money, given the current odds. Indiana 5, Michigan 3, Minnesota 1, Minnesota 2, Minnesota 7, Missouri 2, Montana, North Carolina 11, Nebraska 2, New Jersey 2. I think Van Drew holds on. New Jersey 7. Wouldn't surprise me to see a famous name flip that seat. New Mexico 2, New York 1, New York 2, New York 11, New York 22, New York 24, Ohio 1, Oklahoma 5, Pennsylvania 1, South Carolina 1, Texas 21, Texas 22, Texas 23, and Texas 24.
Ooh, going for the burbs too, huh?
Yep. Because these are Trump burbs. The idea that
that's true. They're not all Austin and Dallas burbs.
Exactly. These are places that went for Trump by 5 or more, and they're saying they're going to flip. I'm like, I'm not buying that. Wisconsin 3, I think, is worth the odds. It could be a surprise there. Virginia 2, Virginia 5, Virginia 7, and Utah 4. And I may have some more, but those are all the seats that now a lot of those are Republican incumbent seats, but they're just almost all of them are underdogs for Republicans to win, which is kind of crazy. My view is that some of those seats I think a Democrat may still win, but it's worth the odds. I don't think it's 3-1, 4-1 favorites like they are in the betting markets. Also, I'll probably add to that a few more seats because there's some other working class northern seats that I think are more in play. But my general math is, outside of like California 21 and California 25, I think Republicans just have uniquely good candidates in those seats. Mostly what I looked at is, did the Republican candidate raise a decent amount of money? It doesn't have to be the same amount, but just enough to be competitive to get their message out. That's my metric for money. Do you have enough money to get your message out? Not did the other guy get 4 ads to your 1? Were you at least on up at least 1 ad? And then 2, these are almost all seats outside of a few that where Trump won by 3 or more. And I just think those seats with just turnout alone is going to put, and if we are starting to get into a pure partisan house, if ticket splitting is gone, then the House will flip back if I'm right about Trump. So it's another way to bet on Trump, but it's also a way to diversify because a fair number of those seats are seats that the Republican is running at a odds disadvantage. But as is now starting to show up, in fact, Democrats are nowhere near as safe as. Crystal Ball has Democrats picking up House seats.
I know.
And flipping easily.
He got thrown off of. Look, he got thrown off of Fox News for being, a poll reader. I mean, that's what happened. He even tried to bow and apologize, and he did it again. He's doing it again, even though he used to. And it's really sad, Robert, because he used to care about predictive fundamentals, and it was one of the models that didn't shift that quickly, or not. That's not true as quickly as some of the other polls, some of the other models that really were just clearly poll readers. For instance, he kept Arizona and North Carolina red for a while, and then but all of the things that made them red the first time, why he kept them red. Nothing has changed except for the same polling that showed Hillary Clinton would take North Carolina in 2016. I don't know what to say. I mean, they don't really look at other metrics, so they could always be right when the polls are right, but they're always going to be wrong when the polls are wrong. They don't know how to discern the difference. They just don't. And that's because they don't poll. Look who they hired to poll for them. Reuters, Ipsos. Beto by 3, baby. How'd that work out? Remember that?
Yes.
Come on. And yes, it was close, but come on.
I think 2012 and 2018 really distorted their logic.
Yeah.
Because 2012, a lot of polls
did.
were closed. People were saying, the unskew the polls movement was there. And so when Obama won, who was who they wanted to have win, it seemed to affirm all of their biases and beliefs.
Yeah, I agree.
And they just somehow sort of rabbit holed what happened in 2014, what happened in 2016. And so when they won in 2018 on the House, their predictions, they're like, I knew it. And they somehow, again, rabbit holed their memory of the Senate races in 2018. Many of the gubernatorial races in 2018, and they've just gone back with selective memory. I mean, the other problem is if you want to improve your reasoning, change your motivation. A way to change your motivation is to actually put skin in the game. That's one way to do it. But another way is engage meaningfully your critics in the world of data, in the world of polling.
What the hell happened to that?
Exactly. And
what happened if Nate wouldn't have to be doing what he's doing now in Florida? If he would have, instead of just being an arrogant, hubris filled, whatever, he would have said, you know what, maybe this guy's on to something. Maybe, just maybe, independents in Collier County and independents in Bay County do not vote like independents in Hillsborough County. No, Sherlock, no, I mean, it's a problem when you just shut down debate, Robert, and smear people who have a different take than you, right?
No doubt about it. And it's like what Christopher Lasch argued a long time ago is the reason why we engage our critics and subject their ideas to critics is because it improves our research skills and our knowledge.
Sure.
And when somebody says, hey, you're wrong about something you always thought you were right about. I mean, it's why I spent time researching white working class voting patterns in the Democratic presidential primary over the weekend, because I thought maybe I'd missed something when Elliott Morris said, Biden overperformed in these areas. And then I looked at it, I was like, he means vote share within the Democratic primary, not better turnout within those regions for Democrats. In fact, places like Coos County, New Hampshire, it was down from 2016, which really should not have happened. When you have a contested race against an uncontested race and independents can vote in either, the uncontested race should give people an idea.
Always get the lion's share, of course.
Trump won 3 times more voters in his uncontested presidential primary in 2020 than Obama did in 2012. So Obama's around 6 to 6.5 million. Trump got over 18 million. I mean, that gives you an idea. That was a highly, highly unusual turnout.
Yeah.
But historically, always the uncontested race is going to be a lot more interest than the contested race. If I was an independent in New Hampshire, I would have voted in the Democratic primary. Why waste my time in the Republican one? I can at least have an influence over here. So when working class voters in Coos County, northern New Hampshire, were so uninterested in the Democratic primary.
That's right. Yep. Tells you everything.
Fewer of them voted than voted in 2016. That's a glaring warning. It's exactly the opposite of the point Elliott Morris was claiming to make. So why do I know that? I know that because I'm engaging my critics.
You're engaging.
Reading my critics. None of these guys are. Larry Sabato, he follows me, but he's never engaged me. And it's clear it's like Kyle Kondik hasn't meaningfully engaged me. Miles Coleman hasn't. All of them should have. If I was in their shoes, I would have found out. I would have talked to you. I would have talked to Patrick Basham. I would have talked to Joe
he was
Otto.
a two-faced. He was a two-faced. I'm not going to say, I'm not going to call a bad name here, but we talked all the time. And then when Stu Rottenturd started smearing me, somebody, because he's a piece of trash who talks garbage behind your back, somebody got their hands on the messages and sent them to me. So, and I'll tell you what, I was like really pissed off that Larry would do that. I was, he's so nice to your face. He's like, this is the thing about these people where they like mock Trump for being so crass. They're just really good at being liars and pretending to be decent people. Doesn't mean they're any better than Donald Trump. And he stopped interacting with me when he flipped out during the first debate. And I said something back to him because he said, that's it. Cancel the debate. You can't even have a meaningful debate with the president. And I said, he interrupted first, Larry. He had a fine answer to healthcare. They had 2 exchanges back and forth, and Biden began to interrupt. Then Chris Wallace jumped on him And he said, all right, fine. It's 2-on-1. Let's do this. Let's rumble. That's how that went. He refused to acknowledge that Biden interrupted first. And then Chris Wallace was playing favorites and they tried to tag team the president. He refused to acknowledge it. So now he just took his little ball like a little baby and went back home. But it doesn't matter anyway, because I was basically done having any meaningful dialogue with him after I saw the crap he was talking about me behind my back. Like I said, though, like a typical beta would do, real men, real alpha men say something in your face and you hatch it out. You know what I mean? Like, look, I got a problem with you here, and you hatch it out. Only these little beta do that stuff, man.
Well, by the way, it's one of the things that, like, I see already the narrative they're trying to build. The narrative in 2016 was Hispanic voters crush Trump. That was the narrative. I was in Dublin, and they had the stories pre-printed for the day of the election, which of course ended up being all wrong. This year it's going to be women. That's the new narrative. So the narrative is going to be women voters just don't like Trump. This is why he lost. So you expect to see these stories over today and tomorrow. It's what they forget. I always remind people, like when people complain about Trump's demeanor and disposition, I'm like, and you can argue there are certain excesses to it, of course, but for each and every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction.
Not a vacuum.
Exactly. So for while Trump's style does turn off certain women voters, it also turns on and turns interested male voters. Working class men love his style, and that's why. So for every woman voter's like, I'm not going to vote for him because I don't like his style, there's a working class male independent voter who's going to vote for him because they do like his style.
Yep. That's how he would keep Arizona. That's how he would keep Arizona. That's how he'd flip
tough guy. It was like when they were doing shirts saying I won't repeat all the shirts, but it was basically, DC, watch out for this because Trump's already done grabbing all of that when he comes to DC. So it was that kind of masculine kind of humor. They're gonna be shocked on election day because those rural working class voters are gonna pour out in ways they haven't done since Harry Truman.
And I forgot that leads me back to something I just want to mention on Georgia real quick, that there is evidence that that's going to happen because with places where people said they were going to at certain times, they appear to be doing it. And here, I'll just say though, real quick for David, before I move on to Georgia real quick, and we don't have to spend time on Georgia, but I'm just saying, I want to prove a point. David, not really. I mean, he could technically lose Pennsylvania and still win, but not comfortably.
Well, the only way that's going to happen likely
is if Ann Seltzer is wrong and I'm wrong, because the working class vote is now back to where it was. So
my takeaway would be the way that could happen is two ways. If the Norwegian voter is voting different than the Pennsylvania voter. So when the Midwest goes in opposite directions, it's disproportionately Norwegians. In Minnesota, in 2004, Norwegians trended Democrat. Pennsylvania trended towards W. So even though he didn't win it, he got much closer. That only tends to happen when you usually in a war case that you have the patriotic vote go for the pro-war, the war candidate, the anti-war.
But there's no war here, brother. And he's been talking about drawing it down.
I don't see that splitting. Now, Trump does have a side door option, which is how could he lose the Midwest and still win if he wins New Hampshire and Nevada and Arizona?
Yeah.
That is his backside door out to the exit plan if somehow he loses. But like I said, everybody that's predicting no way Michigan, but yes Pennsylvania, or no way Pennsylvania, but folks, these states go together. They
go really close.
Demographics, like what Richard's picking up in Lackawanna County. If you read Kevin Phillips' Emerging Republican Majority, what you find is there's a good portion of Polish voters in that part of the region and other ethnic groups like that. And Polish voters are trending Trump. And so, and they don't care that Joe Biden lived there 70 years ago. Which Trump has done I wish he would have come back to it a little more, because that
Me
was
too.
such a great comic
It
riff.
was smart.
He's
It
like,
was smart.
the guy keeps saying he's from Scranton. He hasn't lived in Scranton in 70 years.
He should have kept hammering on that. And the war.
Yeah, on the
You
war.
know, but in
He did come
Robert,
back to trade. He's doing political ads on trade in the Midwest. He is just hammering trade down the stretch. So that's good to see.
the trade margin is huge between U.S.-China relations and then trade negotiations. His margin is huge. So if they tend to, vote on that, it's going to, and that may be what breaks it a little bit later for him. That maybe that's why it's widening out a little bit more, because he did hammer that home. And remember, PA does not vote that early. And let me just get this out. In Georgia, as of Sunday, 1.4 million non-college whites had already voted. So there's a lot of votes still on the table, but in areas where they needed to get it out, right? Check this out. Democrats did well in their areas, like Fulton, that's at 105. DeKalb is at 99. But some of these red counties, Butts, 120%. Forsyth, 121. Walton, 101. Habersham, 111. Dawson, 114. Catoosa, 111. Jackson, 117. Towns, 111. I mean, those are rural votes. Rural working class Georgian votes. And there's a lot left on the table. And by the way, in Georgia, read the polls, actually college educated whites, if you lump them together, actually are expected to vote for Trump by a slight margin, because he does better in Georgia with voters who just have a bachelor's degree, So,
and the reason for that is a high number of evangelicals amongst that vote.
That's
Compared to the rest of the population. If you want to understand the Georgia voter, just look up on YouTube a song called "Country Roads" by a group called Exodus Clan. And country folks. It's one of my favorite songs. And they got some great visuals to match up with it. And that's why I think Georgia's going to go. But the other reason why Pennsylvania and Minnesota, like if you see an anomaly like Pennsylvania and Minnesota go Trump, but yet Michigan and Wisconsin don't, the reason could be trade and fracking. The steel tariffs have had a disproportionate impact in the Iron Range in Minnesota and Western PA. And they've been beneficial, but not as beneficial in Wisconsin and Michigan as they have Minnesota and PA. And by the way, Nate Cohn is trying to come up in advance with why his polls might have been wrong in certain states.
2-1 support on tariff use in Minnesota too, with 2-1. Pennsylvania's.
After you started asking the fracking question, he started asking the fracking question. He admitted in Pennsylvania.
What a fracking. Never mind.
Exactly. There's a lot of play on words you could have there. But he acknowledged that his results showed the same as you did in Pennsylvania, that fracking is popular in Pennsylvania.
Very.
Which, frankly, don't have to be a genius for. You just know a whole bunch of jobs depend upon it in Northeast and Southwest PA.
This is their livelihoods, Nate. They don't give a damn about whether or not you think he's decent. They have to survive. They have to live and feed their families.
Environmental documentaries about how phones are going to come out of the kitchen sink. They know that they live it, they breathe it. It's their life. It's their way, and so they understand what needs to be done. And that was probably the one. It was interesting. I wouldn't have anticipated that faux pas. The faux pas being Biden talking about how he wants to get rid of the energy industry. That was the other thing. He's going to win Texas after that.
Listen, right. I was just going to, man, you stole that right out of my mouth. And listen, if Biden goes on to lose tomorrow and Trump's, excessively strong in these Midwest states, I'll be thinking about that fracking comment during that debate. I mean, it's hands down. All right, I could see Larry busting my chops here, which means they probably need me for a test. Let's get through two more questions, though, before. If the vote boils down to PA deciding the election, what is Trump's strategy or path for fighting post-election ballot stuffing? That's a great question. He's trying to do that right now. Amy Coney Barrett screwed him over a little bit, I got to tell you.
No doubt about it. They are segregating those ballots, howeause So they did win a partial win. They got the attorney general to agree, even though he's taking pot shots at Trump publicly, which was dumb on his part. If you want to look nonpartisan, don't use your Twitter feed to attack the other guy when you're the one defending whatever the state's up to on elections. Just see right. But the net effect of it is they are segregating that ballot. It is a risk. Particularly in Philadelphia, but here's the reality. They're not going to pack that ballot if Trump wins by more than a point on election night. So if Trump's up by more than a point, they're not going to fight it. They're not going to try to steal it. They're going to, and especially if Trump wins one of the other states, because in Wisconsin, all the votes have to be in by election night. Minnesota by election night. Pennsylvania Michigan by election night. So they're not going to waste their time
election night.
risking, getting exposed if Trump's already won anyway. So that's why his main strategy has been win where I should win, and win the states I need to win, other than Pennsylvania, so that they're disincentivized from stealing the ballot.
And then here's this one. He's been dying to ask this. Michigan and Whitmer, any effect on her being a dictator? Basically what he was saying before, and I saw some of the questions before, was basically, the lockdown. Look, I think the lockdown is going to have some impact. There is in Pennsylvania, it was a big deal for the voters we spoke to in Pennsylvania. They can't survive another lockdown. So maybe they were thinking, because they're a swing voter in Western Pennsylvania or Northeastern Pennsylvania. And they were thinking, and they're registered Democrats, by the way. And they were thinking, you know what, let's maybe try something new, give something else another chance. The minute Biden said, lockdown, and by the way, you saw Biden all over Twitter and in his rallies, I'm not going to lock down. I'm not going to lock down, because he saw it. It was Michigan and it was Pennsylvania. And they were like, what? Because he's got to cut into Macomb, Robert. He's got to cut. Oakland's going to vote for him no matter what, but he can't let Macomb and Monroe wipe away the margin in Oakland, which is what they were headed to do. So, because now his Wayne vote is so low. So It's like, what if Trump killed me?
That Grand Rapids vote out there, that vote's going to come back home out in Ottawa County and parts of Grand Rapids and part of basically Western Michigan. So you add that to a depressed Democratic turnout in Wayne County, and his increase in Washington and in Ann Arbor area and in Oakland does not offset that. He's still losing. He has to make up gains in working class Michigan. If he doesn't, he loses Michigan. And so I think, and for people that asked, in terms of election night, I've created a locals channel. It's a separate community on Dave Rubin created this locals to be independent of censorship and suppression. So me and Viva created one. It's called Viva Barnes Law. So you go to vivabarneslaw.locals.com. I'll put a link the comments below. That's where I'm going to be exclusively on election night. So I'll be answering questions there, comments there, responding to it. People can subscribe. It's like $5 a month. So, it's not like it's a huge amount. But that's where I'm going to exclusively be on election night. I'll explain more about bets there, about anything. If I think something's looking good or bad, like election night 2018, I told people that had live bets.
Get out.
I told them dump the House market, because the House market went from 35% chance it goes Republican to 50% early in the trading. I was telling people get out now, because I saw that there were bad early vote numbers. And I'll be looking at certain demographic groups and where those numbers are. Where is turnout in certain African-American areas? Where is turnout in rural working class areas, in those places that report early? And that will tell us a lot. And if it looks like what's looked like so far, it's going to be another shocking election for the political establishment, the media establishment. It may be the end of the credibility of university and media pollsters that got this wrong. Richard, both in Trafalgar, and Patrick Basham and Susquehanna, and even Seltzer now in Iowa are the ones predicting a Trump victory. And they were the only ones predicting it in 2016. So so I think that we're heading towards that outcome again. And I think it may be I think it will be a bigger electoral college win than even he had in 2016. And that's going to shock the world. If not, then we'll have to adjust accordingly. And I'll be looking at travel plans quickly.
That's at least he's honest, folks. And I'll tell you guys, I'm going to do my thing tomorrow night, and I'll give it to you before results come in, but I look, I see the late deciders are going to the president everywhere we were polling. Biden's lead was not that big, and he also needed a certain electorate. There's two things that could really, the uncertainty is Trump needs a big election day turnout. The history and everything thus far says it looks like he's going to get it. All right. It's not guaranteed, but it looks like he's more likely than not to get it. Biden's lead in the early vote He missed the market pretty much everywhere. They like to fawn all over Texas, and they find their little spots to talk about because they don't want to talk about Michigan. They don't want to talk about being well below Hillary in Philadelphia. They don't want to talk about now I think Biden will eclipse Hillary in the burbs, but it won't matter if he comes up so short in Philadelphia County and the Northeast flips on him. It just won't matter. Florida was a catastrophe for them. I mean, they are now relying and hoping and praying that Nate Cohen is right. I mean, when he's been wrong for the last 4 elections in Florida, I mean, it's just not a good place to be. Truth is, and always has been, that not all polls are created equal, and not all pollsters are good. And I hate to say it, but it's true. I hoped after 16 we would have a meaningful dialogue. I got smeared. I hoped after 18, I said, whoa, the states suck. These polls were bad. And the president's going to be decided by state polls. Now we got tip IBD at 3. That is a more than 88% chance of a Biden loss in the Electoral College. A 3-point popular vote victory is an 88% chance of an Electoral College loss for Joe Biden. That is the truth. And Rasmussen has them by 1. They may be better at polling nationally than they are at polling states. I hate to tell you, because look, you can't have Biden up by 1 in Florida and up by 1 nationally. You just can't. You can't have him up 5 in Pennsylvania and up by 1 nationally. That's a 3.5 to 5. Old school 3.5, Obama era. Now that's like a 5-point national win. It doesn't make It just some things. Maybe the tracking is the better bet. I don't know, but the bottom line is, you wouldn't want to be the candidate who's in the position of trying to hold on to what was really, in their own words, an inflated lead by media polls. They didn't believe it. They were down in Michigan. Their polls obviously look worse than my own, because Michigan is one of the ones though where I just don't like the undecideds, Robert. But you know what could happen? They just don't vote.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't vote.
I think what's going to happen in Michigan, the reason why I think he still holds Michigan, though I think, again, easier in Minnesota to flip or Pennsylvania to win because of the unique trade dynamics that are impactful economically there. And because there's fewer Norwegians in Michigan than there are in Wisconsin or Minnesota, that is a good Trump trending group. So I still think, and Michigan was a place where there was a high Democratic presidential primary turnout, but again, there was in 2012 Republican in Wisconsin, so that didn't foreshadow anything there. But so is because there isn't a particular Trump trending group other than Western Michigan, unless the working class vote increases its vote share from 2016. Now there is signs of that occurring. So I think he's holding his blue collar industrial base. I think he'll bleed a little in the suburbs in Washington, not all suburbs, but the kind of suburbs that are in southern Oakland and Washington County. I don't think people think he's bleeding in Livingston. That ain't happening.
I polled it. That's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I polled it.
That's for people who saw that. And yeah, Richard knows Livingston County.
That's a live caller artifact of the model. I just want to say this, and I'll leave with this, Robert. Trump campaign on a press call just told the media this is their metrics in Pennsylvania. Right now, Biden has racked up, including Philadelphia, Robert, a 750,000 vote lead headed into election day. Folks, that may sound like a lot, but it's abysmal for a Democrat. Trump is projected to get 2.6 million votes on election day. Biden is projected to get 1.5 million votes on election day. Add them together, and that's a pretty resounding victory in the state of Pennsylvania for Donald Trump. And by the way, it would look a lot like JP Morgan's analysis.
Exactly. And it would look like the voter registration model's analysis.
That's when right.
Both of them said it was going to be that kind of margin of Pennsylvania +2, +3. And I mean, for folks that don't know, he was supposed to get an 800,000 vote edge at least in the early voting out of Philadelphia alone. And then he was supposed to get another 800,000 vote edge out of the suburbs in Pittsburgh. So he basically missed that by more than half. And
if they don't come out and vote, he's screwed. He's screwed. If they don't come out tomorrow, he is screwed because
not interested. And not only did your poll pick it up, New York Times poll even picked it up in Philadelphia. Basham's poll picked it up in Philadelphia.
Yeah, some left-wing trolls started trashing me on that. They're like, "Oh, you got him so high in Philadelphia." I'm like, dude, the New York Times has him 4 points higher. You schmuck. Yes. So I mean, really.
Well,
look.
the Italians were trending Trump anyway. I mean, like
those two
whoever
words.
doesn't like that style, but particularly the Philly ones. I mean, there's a difference between the upscale and other places. But if you still live in Philadelphia and you're Italian, and you're living in Northeast or Southwest Philadelphia, like Ward 66 and some of the wards in the 30s and the Southeast portion, Trump's style is exactly your style. I mean, so that's where I think we're going to have a very fun night tomorrow night. Yeah, it'll be a little bit of work for you, but for the rest of us, it'll still be
I don't ever have fun on election nights. They suck for me. They suck. Exactly. And Laura's got me working to the bone, and that's why I got to go because I got to go do these testings. I never have fun on election night, Robert. It just blows for me. It really does. But then afterwards, it's like I don't know, coming down. You know what I mean? It really is.
Well, I'll leave people with this. The British bookies, who all thought Trump had no chance, who were happy to take my money in 2016, told me to stay home, Bobby, for 2020.
Yeah.
How nervous they are. They're
not taking it anymore.
The mere fact that I was the one willing to bet Trump led them to not be willing to take my bets. So that tells you a lot about what people really think when they have to have skin in the game.
All right, folks. Look, we'll be back. It's going to be an interesting night tomorrow night. Like I said, it's going to be interesting. But we'll see you guys soon. And Robert, follow Robert at Barnes_law if you don't already. And definitely check him out if you guys got skin in the game, because he will give you, if there's, not just for where you could go with opportunity, but in case you need to go somewhere else because maybe you got a bad bet out there or something. It's pro tips. So check him out on election night. All right, guys, all the best. Thanks for joining. Thanks for supporting. And we love you guys for it. And look, see you on Wednesday, folks. See you on Wednesday. All right, Robert. Thanks, my friend. All the best.
Adios.
The lights that shine down over dotted lines of white across an open highway, restless nights, coffee houses, clubs and neon lights. I rock the people my way, working my way, coming back to you, working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning.